great day. Mixed it up a little bit. Instead of tea today, I have coffee. I think you can see it. Well, it looks very similar, but I have some coffee here. Uh, Decided to go a bit ironic today, considering I'm wearing my T-shirt. Oh, it's reversed. Well, it says it's a T-shirt. You can read backwards. I believe in you. I believe in your ability to read backwards. Uh, yeah, got some coffee here. Made some Turkish coffee with cardamom. Very very good. And today we got a little bit different. I'm gonna explain a bit more about what's going on, what the title of this is in a moment. Since I'm sure you're wondering, we haven't covered this exact thing before, so it might be confusing if you haven't heard of it already. However, before I get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about something I got up to between last stream and this one, which is I went and donated blood. And I know that's a very common thing to do, but it is, I think, something that it's kind of awesome. Christopher Hitchens actually has some really interesting things to say about it, uh, but including but not limited to, it doesn't cost you anything, right? Like you your body produces blood to recoup any that you lose within reason. You can't like lose half your blood and be all right. But your body produces it again, so you don't really lose anything, but someone else gains something. And so, just very briefly, I want to encourage anyone, if you're able to go donate blood. Costs you nothing but your time. Feel good about it. They send you little cards in the mail of like, hey, you helped this person. What I do in particular is good for that. I donate platelets. They asked me once if I wanted to try it, and I was like, yeah, sure. You know what? Let's try doing that. When you donate platelets, what they're taking, as I understand, is they take the part of the blood that forms clots, because a lot of people, well, I don't know about a lot of people, but some number of people need transfusions of that, like they don't produce enough or whatever ailment that they're receiving treatment for reduces their ability to produce clots or produce platelets or whatever. And so they take that out of the rest of your blood and then give you the rest back. So when you do it, I mean, if you don't like needles, this is going to be a little scary, but you have one line into one arm and one into the other, with one of the lines taking blood and the other one returning your blood back to you. The stuff that isn't being separated out by the machine. It also kind of takes a while, so uh, I'm okay with it. But again, like, know what you're getting into if you want to look into this. It takes about 2 hours just sitting in the chair, just sitting there, unable to move. You're about 2 hours just squeezing the little pump thing they give you. I'm doing it right behind chat, so you guys can't. All right, I'll use the other hand. But you like doing the little squeezies to keep the blood flowing. Uh, so yeah, it's like you're sitting for 2 hours. Time was a little faster for me because I decided to donate. They asked if I wanted to give plasma as well. They said I was eligible. I was like, sure, all right. I haven't done that before. Let's add that into the mix. And they said that reduced the time, so I think it was a whole total of 100 minutes, where normally it's closer to 2 hours. I'm sitting there. Um, they said they like my blood because I have like I'm apparently very dense platelet count, so it's like they get like a triple unit from me or something, whereas that's not always the case. But the reason why I mentioned this, the reason why it's kind of cool, is that platelets, as I understand, they don't last very long, even with our modern technology of like because they clot. That's like their whole thing. They have to put them in this machine that swishes the bag back and forth, and even then they don't have very much time. So I think it's like a week outside of the body they can keep platelets good enough to be used. So within a week from when I give blood, or when anyone gives platelets, it's used. And that's really cool, right? Like immediate, like this isn't sitting somewhere and like they'll eventually use it or whatever. No, it's getting used this week, now. It's also why it's kind of always a shortage. I get emails all the time of like, oh, there's another platelet shortage, because of course there is. You can't store it up. It's not like, okay, we had too many people donate platelets this month. We'll just save it for later. No, you can't do that. It needs to get used immediately. So, uh, if you can, it is really awesome if you can donate to. There are a lot of organizations that do this. Some buy your blood, some don't. I prefer to donate as opposed to buying. They always offer all sorts of stuff. They offer like gift cards and whatever else. I never want to take any of it. The only thing I'll take are the shirts. They'll give me T-shirts. I'm like, all right, sure. All right, sure. Anyway, um, but yeah, it's kind of a cool thing. Like obviously doing platelets isn't for everybody. If you don't like needles, okay, I get it. If you can't, right? And sometimes you can't. I actually had to stop for quite a while because there was something that made it impossible for me to donate blood. And so, okay, like I stopped. I used to go. There was a while where I was going like every month, and I stopped for a few years. And so I went back last Friday, and I'll try to get back into the swing of it. Uh, and there's stuff that can get in the way. Like I've had weird experiences. I'm not gonna say it's all like sunshine and roses, but you can work through that stuff. Like there was a little while when I was giving platelets and I was just in immense pain for most of the time, and I was just like, I don't know what it is about this process or whatever. Like I was like, maybe they just like poked you with the needle wrong. Sometimes that happened. That happened last time. I have a bruise actually because they kind of poked me wrong. It's not a big deal for the bruise or whatever, but when you're sitting there for, it wasn't the entire time that I was in pain, but like for an hour, hour and a half, when you're just in extreme pain, it kind of sucks, and it made it hard to go back. Well, they came to find out I have a sensitive vein. Just pick a different one. Now that they use the other one, no problems. Uh, oh yeah, I forgot to mention they do give you like a movie to watch or something. Actually, it's better now than when I used to go. It used to be like they have a DVD selection, you pick one, you put it on, and you watch that during your time. In this case, and since then they've updated, so now they have like uh, Roku or a Fire Stick or something like that with a TV, so that you have a remote and you can pick stuff to watch. They have Netflix, whatever else. Uh, so you're not like just staring into space for an hour and a half. It would be nice to take a nap sometimes. Sometimes it like you feel a little tired, right? You're losing blood, it makes you a little you lose a little less energetic because of it. But no, don't take a nap while you're doing it. That's it's a bad idea. I don't know if it's like dangerous or anything, but it's one of those like it's at the very least the nurses that are helping like have to be concerned if that's the case because they don't know if you took a nap or passed out. So like it'd be nice to take a nap, but you can't really. You also can't keep squeezing the little pumpy thing while you're napping, and like what if you turn over with the needles in you? It's really rough. And you really have to be pretty still for this. Not perfectly so. They make it seem like you have to be more still than I found I actually can be. Like I can wiggle a little bit. But don't just do that on my recommendation. Listen to the people, the professionals, not some idiot from the internet. Uh, yeah, I mean, even this last time they were having some trouble. I'm looking at my arm, like you can see it. They couldn't find a vein that they were comfortable with in my right arm for a bit. So like, okay, are you okay with putting it in your hand? In the back of the hand at first, and I was like, oh, I prefer not. And they were like, well, it's just the return line. It's not the hand that's going to be squeezing, and it's not the line we're taking out of. It's the one that's coming back in. I'm like, sure, but if you could find another one, they still couldn't find a workable one in the back of my hand. So I'm like, all right, cool. Then was like, okay, what about one in your wrist? Which ended up hurting a lot. So they nixed that, found someone else to help, and there was one in my arm. So like, turns out it was okay. But like I said, like these things can happen. It's not like and I don't want this to be like scary or anything. So much as like, okay, yeah, stuff like that can happen, but once you get into it, doesn't hurt. For 2 hours, it's fine. Just no pain. You're just chilling. You're watching your movie. They check on you, make sure you're okay. Obviously give you snacks and something to drink afterwards to help you feel better. This time I was also a little more out of it than I usually am. I think that's in part because of the plasma thing and because it's been so long since I've donated. I was I wasn't woozy or anything. I was just low energy. in even lower energy than I would expect to be. But you know, a couple hours later, I was fine, right back at it. And different people have different experiences with it. Obviously, you should take care of yourself. Hydrate. Just generally, just it's a good idea to stay hydrated, but also before giving blood, you know, make sure you have a meal or whatever. I have skipped on that, by the way. I have skipped on eating or drinking before giving blood before, and I have been okay, but obviously it's not recommended. And I've seen someone get very anemic afterwards and like puking and have a headache and really tired and whatever. Like, but from being dehydrated beforehand. So it's important to like take care of yourself, but when you can do it right, you know, it's really not that big a deal. It's mostly a convenience thing. And for whole blood, you're like, especially if you make an appointment, if you're just the normal thing people are used to for giving blood, you're in and out like within a half hour or something like that. It's not even very much time. A lot of these, like, as long as you take care of yourself, you're not gonna have these effects. And you do something good, right? You make the world a little bit better. Someone's life is better off because you could donate, you know, because now blood is accessible and it doesn't really I don't know if I don't know if organizations like this like sell blood to hospitals or if they just give it. I don't really know what the situation is. But like because organizations like this exist, people can get blood transfusions and that really matters, you know. Sometimes that's life-saving, sometimes it's just important that we have access to it and that it's not scarce, and it really doesn't cost you much to do. So there's my little PSA. You know, giving blood is good. I highly recommend it. But of course, take care of yourself when you do it, and you know, listen to the advice that they have for you. So yeah, that's my little spiel about giving blood. Now on to what we're talking about today. I think at this point my coffee might be cool enough to drink. It is, and it is quite good. Not quite as good as the coffee I had prior, but I ran out. It was I forget where it was from, but it was quite good. I have some local stuff instead. That's all right. But now on to what we're talking about. So Jubilee is a organization. They have a YouTube channel. They do all sorts of videos, included in these videos. So I hope you can't hear that helicopter going by. Among these videos are these like middle ground videos where they get two groups of people, usually three on each side, but not always, that have different views. So in this case, like we have black conservatives versus white liberals, and they get them. Well, they'll ask some like conversation starter questions. You'll see as we get into this. One of the tendencies they have though is that the people who are usually on the more conservative side are like, so often it seems like they just pick random people. And on the conservative side, you look into like, oh, it's someone whose like job it is to be a conservative pundit, who has media training, whatever. And like on the left, you have we found some liberal in college or whatever. That's frequently how it is. Not always, but frequently, and they've been criticized for that in the past. However, in this instance, I know at least one of the people in there is someone who is very good at expressing his views and stating his positions and arguing for them well, and that is a streamer by the name of Destiny. If you haven't heard of Destiny and you have heard of me, that is very surprising. But the short version is he used to do exclusively video game streaming, but then he kind of introduced the idea of like politics streaming to, at the very least, Twitch, and started like a whole wave of people doing kind of what I do, you know, the debate and politics type stuff. Is kind of the progenitor of that. He is someone with whom that I do not always see eye to eye. He's more liberal than leftist, and so we disagree on a lot of stuff. He's not a socialist, for example. So we don't always agree, but he is definitely someone you could trust to be in a situation like this and handle himself well. And so I'm excited to see what comes about here. I haven't seen this, obviously, so let's see what comes out. I don't know who anyone else who's in there. I just know that Destiny is. Okay, there's not much of this like preamble.
This is the 112th episode of Middle Ground, and we want you to help us decide what the next 112 episodes will be. Join our Middle Ground Patreon community and make...
Okay.
I was chosen to read the following prompt white Americans have way more advantages than black Americans.
So this is what I mean. They'll have like something like this. They'll ask people to like step forward if they agree, and then they'll those the people who step forward will start a conversation, and then later everyone else will join in, having the thoughts been laid out. I don't know if it's like the best format or whatever. Oh, I should also do like theater mode. I don't know if it's the best format or anything, but it's at least interesting. Like, all right, we like it's not what we're here for. I am curious
Similarity
mostly
here,
to establish to like.
it would
Oh,
seem
and
so.
people will
Do
generally
white
sit
Americans have
on the
more advantage?
side that they agree with, but I guess in this case it's not. So one of the conservatives, it looks like, and all of the liberals agree that white Americans have more advantages than black Americans. A position with which I agree. I'm not going to get into it too much, but I do agree with that position as well.
Advantages because they're white, or do just white Americans have advantages
And
because
that's
of
Destiny
historic
speaking.
factors? I think that people want to argue at the end of the day over whether it's because you're white or not. I think that the answer is because you're white in the past, and that's how it kind of carries over to today. You know, even in times of the United States history where black people have tried to build wealth, you know, with the Tulsa riots and everything, where that this wealth has been destroyed. And something that's upsetting to me is when
So I'll pause here just because I want to state what we're going to be looking for as in addition to reference or in addition to talk about what he just said. Because this is a situation where you're not really having a debate. Where there's a lot of structural difficulties in just the format. You're not going to be able to get into like let's lay out our positions and argue why things are correct or not. It's a lot more about how you come across and about making statements that are a lot more intuitively correct, which is why what Destiny did at the outset is so smart. He immediately goes like, "Well, do we mean that like, oh, because you're white, someone hands you money?" No, but clearly the past has consequences, and it has been historically, and this is unquestionable. Like I can't even imagine conservatives disagreeing with this, that white people have had the ability to accrue wealth far more than black people have in the United States, and you can immediately just like solidify, yes, there are advantages that come with that. Now, often the retort to this is something to the effect of like, oh, but it's been X number of years. Shouldn't they have been able to develop this by now? Well, one, there are structural forces in place to prevent this. This is things like redlining uh, or mass incarceration or Jim Crow laws going back. Uh, but also, you know, this was being said. This has always been disingenuous. This was being said 20 years after the end of the Civil War, when, as we've learned on this channel, there were still slaves. There was still slavery, but it was act like, oh no, it's over now. Well, without the ability to, without the tools in place to begin to really accrue wealth, then no, these problems are going to persist. This needs to be something like this. There needs to be a systemic solution to this problem. By the way, one of the things he mentioned is a really good thing to note is the Tulsa city bombing. There was I think it was called Black Wall Street, where it was basically a bunch of black businesses that were accruing wealth by exclusively doing business with each other, not letting the money leave the community, and they were literally bombed by the U.S. government, or I think it was by the U.S. government. So like, even when there are attempts made to to get to like get economically, or to like advance economically by black people, there are eff- conscious, open, active efforts made to prevent it. So yeah, that makes it difficult to climb out of the hole that's been dug for them.
when conservatives talk about how we can't blame the past for what's happening in the present, that is true to some extent. But then in the next breath, they'll talk about how important it is to have dual-parent households, how important it is to have a strong family, to have responsibility passed on from parent to child. And we've seen in the past that because of racial issues, that process has been severely disrupted.
So this is a little bit more difficult. Like, I agree with that completely. The only difficulty is that the through line of the family being the result of these systemic problems is one that conservatives often balk at. Now, maybe this is a safer position to take when most of the people you're in conversation right now are liberal, but in case you're unclear, if people are getting locked up for having small amounts of weed or whatever, and that's felony imprisonment, then it becomes a lot harder to have that person as a parent in the home raising a kid. And there's a lot of that. Like, this is why mass incarceration is such a problem that like keeps people in generational holes, for lack of a better term, of like, okay, yeah, having multiple parents in the household is good, but then it helps prevent future criminality, but then like you're locking up people for bullshit reasons, sometimes not even real reasons. Most charges, remember, get resolved by plea bargain. We don't even know if the person is actually guilty or not. It's a whole thing that I am not best suited to lay out. But if you don't understand that connection, which conservatives often deny that connection, then the through line isn't as clear. Even though I agree.
Agreeing with all these things is when I
see. Notice he has to like he's starting with agreeing. Yeah.
I was younger, which arrived me to my standpoint of being a conservative because I believed it was racist, Democrat, liberal ideologies and policies dating all the way back to the 1800s, all the way up to the 1960s, and then the purported big switch. But I think it was more so when Democrats decided to be a bit more cloak and dagger.
Okay, so like this is like, I don't know. People are trying to forget history and rewrite history. Yes, the Democratic Party was the party of like, well, I guess no party was really good on race, but like, yes, the Democratic Party was the big party pushing for slavery and pushing for Jim Crow laws and whatever else. That changed, however, because like since Lincoln, the racists of the South were like, I'm never voting for the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln. But then in the 1960s, when LBJ signed the Civil Rights Act, it was LBJ, right? Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Suddenly, Democrats were the ones who were pro-racial equality, and so the racists started voting Republican again. And people act like this just didn't happen, like he's pretending, like, oh no, they just hid it. Now it's more cloak and dagger or whatever. It's like the bigotry of low expectations. I promise he's going to say that. But it ignores that while Democrats are often not good on race, Republicans are bad on it. Like, they actively want to make things worse constantly, and they say so out loud.
About their true opinions of black people and be more secretive and more, we want to help you by doing these things and seeing them as inferior.
So like, yeah, great question from this guy, from Alec here. Yeah, what the hell? Like, why are you being so vague? Let's concretize it, but also like to pretend like, this helping is somehow bad because it's this like conservative mindset of like, and you just bootstrap yourselves up, not taking into account the fact that the system is designed to make that impossible.
Affirmative action, welfare, all sorts of things
that
eventually ruin our culture in places where we
ruin our culture. But notice the like how vague it is. Yeah, we're gonna see a lot of this. Like, we're gonna gesture at vague, like, it's ruining our culture by mechanisms I will never lay out, and contrasted with like, well, here's the facts of the matter of this is what happens to people, and this is what's actually going on, and why these things are necessary, and why should welfare be bad for the black community specifically. It's not. It's because conservatives hate welfare because it's good for working and poor people, so they want to dismantle it, so they make it like, they say it's the bigotry of low expectations, so they can get people like basically pretending to be racial advocates by arguing against welfare.
But I want to get back to the history of it, because we're talking about...
Well, I just want to make sure we're clear. Giving them money hurt them, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, giving them, because if your father's out of the home, that's when we give you the money. If you're living in this housing,
so then give them the money while the dad's
rent-free.
Well,
so the argument he's trying to make, obviously, is that like, you're incentivizing bad behavior, but no, like, the levels of idiocy on that are overwhelming. People don't kick the dad out of that. Like, moms aren't like, listen, I gotta be a single mother to get Uncle Sam's check, get the fuck out of the house. This is not a thing that happens. This is not real. But when you put it phrase it the way he does, you imply that it's an incentive, despite the fact that you could never demonstrate that anyone is actually acting on the incentive in that way. It's not an incentive. It's intended to compensate for the difficulties that people in these positions have.
That's
Give
how
them
you
the
get
money
more of
while the dad's in the home.
If you're working
So
this
give
amount of
them the-
hours and getting less than this amount of
You're
dollars,
throwing-
you're getting money
you're
from the
throwing the
government.
baby-
Yes, it is
you're
incentivizing.
throwing the baby out with the
it is-
bathwater.
I don't
Also
even know
true.
what that means in this scenario because yes.
You're
okay, you
throwing
want to talk about throwing babies
okay,
out with
let
the
me break this
bathwater?
down for
Margaret
you.
Sanger wanted to exterminate.
Notice also like how immediately furious the conservative is because you've tapped into the like, oh, this is the best country that's ever been. What is it like? Oh, I forget the name of it. Innuendo Studio talks about it. Where it's like you've triggered the like this is the way things ought to be part of him. He's not thinking rationally anymore, and it took nothing. And this is like the conservatism coming out.
The black race because she thought they were weeds. So yeah, we can literally talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's what.
Oh,
Margaret
now
Sanger-
he's like going off about Margaret Sanger. Like, notice it's completely unrelated.
That's what Democrat policies wanted to do to my people. So that's why I feel so strongly about it, because it is these policies that date back centuries that were built off of the death and poverty of my people.
And by the way, it's because this is an optics game, being on Jubilee like this. Alec kind of messed up a little bit by interjecting and then getting talked over. You can't do both. You can either let him finish and then retort, or you can interrupt but then fight back when he tries to shout you down, because you look weak, and for conservative, weakness is a big deal. By the way, I fucking love the hat, Alec. Hunter Biden 2024, amazing.
Let's
I
take a
love
breath.
it.
So,
I'm breathing.
Are you?
So a lot of babies aren't, but I am.
Yeah, there it is. Like, he's like so mad about this unrelated thing.
when
That's
I
the
say throw the
conservatism.
baby out with the bathwater, you want to completely get rid of welfare, okay? Or at least the I don't want to put that on you. You haven't said that, but the conservative apparatus does.
Oh, I'm sure he does. By the way.
So, giving money to a group of people does not hurt them.
I mean,
It
sure, if
can't.
you're talking about a lottery,
It
just
literally
take
can't.
money. But
Yes.
there are strings
Take money.
attached to that money.
Take all the
there
money.
Are strings
Now,
attached
see,
to
now
that
he's
money.
letting himself get talked
Make
over
them
again. He's
all
got to fight
millionaires.
back.
I don't
Okay,
care.
much better. Okay.
Giving money to black people does not hurt them.
And that has
thinking
not
that-
happened, though. That has not happened.
What do you mean?
That has not happened.
Wait, what do you mean it
Giving-
hasn't
no,
happened?
hasn't
Money
been
hasn't been
raised.
given
It
to
hasn't
them?
been this
So
or that.
what
It has
you're
been
saying,
a welfare program,
welfare
Great
was
Societies
designed-
Act that was
welfare
built
was-
off of the idea of, hey.
And now we're
to get
arguing about
these
something
families
completely
split up, we
unrelated.
get
This
these
is
then
the
let
this
them-
is the advantage of Destiny's approach as opposed to Alex here. Like, it's what Destiny said was completely uncontroversial and inarguable. But now we're getting into the weeds about like welfare, which I mean is also not arguable, but conservatives pretend like it's up for debate or whatever. And we've shifted the subject to something that the conservative can obfuscate about. But if you just if you kept on the subject that Destiny had started, like it's very easy to be like, yeah, you literally cannot argue with the fact of the matter that there are advantages to people, like there are advantages that white Americans have that black Americans don't, at a minimum, because history has consequences.
Just keep the family together and keep all the money.
I mean,
There you go.
I guess
Boom,
so,
done.
but I guarantee you,
I guess
there's
so.
no way that
Why
would
would
happen.
you not advocate for that?
So in your
Also, smart from the other liberals to not jump in there. I know you might want to like rescue Alex or whatever, or Alec or whatever, or even like rephrase the argument, but then it'll come across as like dogpiling. So this is good on them for just like letting this happen and then moving on, like trying to reframe after that. All right, Jacob, what you
research
got?
of like history of this country and everything, do you find like the Reconstruction era and like the failures of like what it wanted to be and then what it ended up being, and then which led into had downstream effects to enter into the
I
Jim Crow
get what he's
era,
getting at.
and,
We'll see how it
we
goes.
have policies like redlining that influence how schools are funded.
What he's talking about, by the way, is that the Reconstruction era, like there were plans for Reconstruction after the Civil War that, I mean, I don't know the specifics of it enough to be like, oh, okay, those would have been a good idea or whatever. But they ended up not happening because Lincoln died, and his VP was a Southern racist conservative and didn't want Reconstruction to happen, and so it ended way too quickly, and the problems weren't solved. And so, like, that's a good point. That's a good thing to like reference. We'll see like how well this works though. Like I get why he wants to talk about that. Of just saying like then that leads to Jim Crow, then that leads to like all these repercussions.
The downstream effects of slavery, do you think put black people
I
as
my guess is he's going to be like,
generally
slavery was
in a worse
160
opposition
years
than
ago. It doesn't
white
matter anymore.
Americans.
Why do people still
Generation by
complaining about
generation,
it?
the effects of slavery have been
Yeah,
diluted,
there it is.
but generation by generation,
Yeah,
the
that's-
effects of racism, welfare-based policies, and things of that nature became even more great.
So I agree with what he said, except for the specifics, right? Like, yes, like the issues of slavery specifically have diminished. However, the repercussions of them haven't necessarily, right? The things that have happened since then, the additional racism. But welfare isn't one of those things. What is one of those things are things like Jim Crow or things like mass incarceration or whatever. But instead, he says, what the conservative hobby horse, right? Like, oh, I hate welfare, so welfare is racist, and we should get rid of it.
in the 1880s or so, when we had our first black members
Oh,
of
here's some
Congress, which were
PragerU
indeed
shit.
Republicans, I think that was a great start for things. But obviously, we had terrible things that happened, like the Tulsa massacre, among black people being chased out of their homes by the KKK.
Sure.
All funded by the Democrat Party, all supported.
Notice back to being the Democratic Party. The implication being that Democrats now are responsible for what people who were ideologically opposed to them but called themselves Democrats did 100 years ago. He would never agree to this, by the way, ever, if I was just like, oh, okay, so like white people who are like did slavery, so that matters, right? Like, this is the double talk that conservatives do all the time to try to demonize the Democratic Party. Notice everything he's saying. I wouldn't be surprised if this guy has some sort of platform where he does like conservative talking, conservative argumentation or whatever, because it's too directed. Every problem he points back to a thing he hates. He hates welfare. Welfare is racist. We're going to talk about that, even though it's completely irrelevant to the conversation at hand. I don't like Democrats, so I'm going to keep saying it was the Democratic Party that was the KKK or whatever. Yeah, sure, but there was a switch in ideology, which he was just like, oh, I don't know if that's real or whatever. They just hit it now, as if that makes any fucking sense whatsoever. You'll notice that the people who are racist don't vote Democrat. They vote Republican, and it's not that Republicans are racist necessarily, but racists vote right wing, vote conservative, because that's what aligns with them, and the right wing party is the Republican Party. Yeah, I don't know. Just let it go.
By the Democrat
Okay,
Party.
well, I mean, I need to stop you there. Can you attribute not to the party but to the ideology? Because I think when you think, regardless of whatever the party.
Okay, I really like this approach, by the way, because I'm also taking issue with him keep pointing it at the Democratic Party. But if you try to argue with him about it, we'll get into the weeds again, like we did with the welfare stuff. You need to get him to move past it and stay on topic, which is going to be fucking impossible. So a good way of doing that is like, hey, let's not talk about it in terms of party. Let's talk about it in terms of ideology. Like, let's talk about it being on the part of racists. But he doesn't want to do that because, well, there's a lot of reasons. But one of them I just laid out. The Republican Party enjoys the racist vote. You can't denigrate them. But you can denigrate the Democrats for being racist, and racists are like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever.
Was traditionally conservative values did not like. That's more aligned with more racist policies
It's
in this
very
country.
difficult
Like
to
very.
compare 2020's conservatism to 1880s conservatism.
Sure, they're different, but you seem to be comfortable saying it's the same for Democrats in the present day and Democrats of the 1800s. You seem super cool with that. I'm very curious about these people who are like, nope, there are no advantages that white people have in America.
So personally, I feel like there's really only one thing that white people have a true advantage over black people with, and it's that white people are less likely to be forced into a box. It happens with black.
Oh, I mean, it's funny you say that because I would agree if that box is a prison cell. But what you mean is like, oh, you're black, that means you have to be a liberal, and that's thought crime or whatever. I'm already getting
Black
annoyed.
people onto other black people, but it especially happens with white liberals onto black conservatives, where we are told that we are supposed to think a certain way, be a certain way, and if we're not, then we're called all these names like etc.
No, what happens is you're identified in public as supporting policies that are against your own interest, and you don't like when that happens, so you're like, no, you're putting me in a box, you're telling me I have to think a certain way. No, we're telling you the fact of the matter is what you're arguing for would make life worse for you and people like you.
And the worst of all is bootlicker, because I hate when a white liberal
stop
tells
licking
me
boots.
as a black man that I'm a bootlicker, because then I ask, whose boot am I licking? Because you're telling me as a white person that me as a black
And now all
person
the
that
race
I'm licking
baiting.
your boot because I don't think in this box that you want me to frame my mentality in. That to me is real racism.
Yeah, that's real racism. Not like, you know, when black people can't get house or can't find housing in certain parts of town. That's not real racism. No, real racism is when you call out my opinions.
We need to stop allowing to happen to us, because black people are so quick now to not branch out.
How in the hell did liberals how in the hell did liberals get considered the snowflakes? When, like, look at this snowflakery. Like, someone disagrees with me taking a position. Wah, that's racism. It's the worst thing. There's no other racism in this country except for that.
Have new ways of thinking, or to go into careers like agriculture and these other career paths that black people don't typically get into. It's not because of racism stopping them from getting in there. It's because we're told for so long that you have to follow this path and you have to think a certain way.
I think America.
But you can think however you want, and then when you do think those things, people can tell you how those things that you think are stupid and actively would make your life worse if they happen. That's good, actually.
Or a black person. I think I'm an American. Anything that's available to you is available to me and mine.
Oh, you can think that. You're wrong, but you can think that. Like, it's objectively
way
untrue.
More privileges than me. Like, I'm sure you could find certain institutions where
I'm
black
sure you
people
could
are
find. I'm sure you can find examples of where that's true, but
treated differently.
she's literally
in
saying that.
general, I
Yeah.
don't think that I've missed out on anything because of being black.
No, okay, and notice how she's framing it. This is how a lot of people do stuff like this. Is like, I don't think I've missed out on anything because of being black. It's about her and that anecdotal situation. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if that's true, even if it is. Let's assume she's completely right. She's never missed out on anything because of being black. Is she every black person? Is she most black people? Is she anyone other than herself? If there's one instance of a person not missing out on anything because of their race, does that mean it's impossible that there's racism? It's obviously nonsense, but she doesn't want to feel like she's held back in some systemic way, so she says she's not.
And if anything, it's given me more of a voice because people will want to hear what I say now because I'm black. So if anything, I have more of a platform now just on the basis of being a black conservative and saying what's not popular than I would if I was just a white person.
So now it's really funny that she's speaking last of the conservatives, given that the person who spoke first was complaining about being called, well, I don't know that I can say it. It's been called a racial slur and it got bleeped out, but literally she's doing that exact thing of like, well, because I'm black and I'm a conservative, people elevate my voice more because they can tokenize me and they can see, look, we have a black that agrees with us. This happens constantly.
Was also conservative.
So she's admitting to that thing that the other guy was complaining about being called, and she's like, no, but being that helps me get ahead. Isn't that good?
I agree with the Supreme Court's decision to end affirmative action.
So, as I understand, yeah, I'm actually really not surprised that Destiny's here. As I understand, affirmative action was just kind of a failed policy in that it didn't accomplish what it intended to. Not that there were the negative ramifications that conservatives have been pretending exist since it was suggested, let alone since it was enacted. But as I understand, like, it just didn't solve the problem, and it was ineffective. Maybe that's not what Destiny will get at, but like, this is not weird for people on the left to like kind of be okay with it. The problem is the ideological reasoning behind it. The Supreme Court didn't end affirmative action because they were like, well, it was ineffective and we need other solutions. They were like, nah, like, we shouldn't be trying to even the playing field. Like, fuck them, right?
I'm not gonna start. Someone else can start. Sorry.
You don't want to start. You haven't said anything yet. Maybe she has. Remember, this is edited, right? We don't know what was missing, but so far she hasn't said anything. So it's kind of weird that they're like, "Oh, we'll show her not want to start." Like, what? I don't know. Place. I want to hear a little bit of what she thinks. She's a person here.
I think that it was necessary for a particular time, and I think that every black person knows how to get into college. I mean, you can pull out the names, the Oprah, the Oprah.
So. Kind of a weird framing that I disagree with. It's very conservative framing. Every black person knows how to get into college. There's not a formula for doing this. There are limited spots. Not everybody can go, and there are also economic economic barriers. You know, if you just can't afford to go, especially because it would mean having so much less time to work, and let alone like, could you imagine like having to work a full-time job and do homework and go to school? This is not something that everyone is capable of doing. Um, Even if you know how to go to college, it's not a formulaic thing. It's not like knowing how to ride a bike. You just do the thing and it will work. There are issues that get in the way aside from, but she's framing it like a skill issue.
President Obama, you can pull out the head of Time Warner was black man, the Forbes was black man. We know what to do now. We don't need affirmative action anymore. And to me, affirmative action is offensive sometimes, especially nowadays, because I have
I'll
6
get to
children
this in a moment.
and 2 boys, 4 girls. And all of them went to Harvard and
Oh, that's
Columbia,
awesome.
and this one and that one.
Good for them.
It breaks my heart to think that they accomplished that goal of getting into these institutions just because of the color of their skin.
I can definitely.
So it's not just because of the. So this is the myth. The myth of affirmative action, and this goes like way back, is that someone in a position to make a decision about hiring or entrance into a college will look at 2 potential applicants. One of them is like, you know, straight A super student who graduated with all honors and is white, and then like one person is, you know, a 2.0, didn't really show up to class but applied anyway and is black, and they're like, ah shit, I gotta take the second. But that's just not what it is. It is, as I understand it, a prescription of preference for if you see 2 people who are like the first person, where they are meritorious but you only have one position, then you should advantage the person who's generally marginalized. The idea being that if someone comes like what's a good example? If like fucking Trump's kid is applying to go to Harvard, his life was pretty easy. Him getting there was not that difficult. Whereas if someone who's from like a poor area of the country, who like went to shitty schools or whatever, but still managed to do very well, like that person's far more motivated, far more engaged. They didn't just coast to get to where they are. It kind of makes sense in a way. Now, maybe that's not always useful, but that was the idea behind it. It wasn't just like, oh, well, you're black, so we'll let you in.
Say that it creates a lot of tension when you have affirmative action. I remember my first week at the University of Illinois, I was sitting with some classmates, and a white student turned to me and jokingly like, hey Xavier, like, did you just attach a smiley face when you applied for this college? And I started asking what he meant, and he said to me that he was like, you're black, I'm assuming you had decent grades, you could have just attached a smiley face and you would have gotten into the university. So I was livid by that, and I went off. I started naming all of my accomplishments, and I felt so confident only for about an hour, because then an hour later I started saying to myself like, wow, like, did I actually earn my way in here? I started to have this insecurity, and I started wondering to myself, did I earn this position myself, or did my ancestors' suffering earn this for me?
So what I want you to note also is the contrast between what they're talking about and what affirmative action is meant to alleviate. Because they're complaining about feeling like they haven't earned what they've gotten. A feeling like, oh, like an imposter syndrome type thing. By the way, everybody feels that. Everybody feels that. Like, you don't actually deserve to be here. Nobody knows you're a fraud yet. This is super, super common. They want affirmative action to go away because it makes them feel like they haven't earned what they have. Like, which is honestly, who gives a shit? The contrast and the thing that affirmative action was designed to, or was intended to alleviate, I should say, is the disparity in hiring across racial lines. Is that it is much harder for a black person to get, or a black person is much less likely to get a job with the same resume as a white person, and this has been observed in studies over and over and over and over again. Just the name on your resume has a huge impact as to whether you get a call back, and that's a big deal. Like, getting hired, I would argue, is more important. Like, your likelihood to get hired is way more important than you feeling like you don't deserve to be there. But they don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about only like, oh, I feel like I don't deserve this. They don't. Do they know, by the way, that affirmative action was like a thing that was being considered by these institutions? They have no idea, right? Like,
And two, I've seen it in the sense of like affirmative action taking away from other people who are minorities. Like I had a friend who was Asian and he in high school and he really wanted to go to MIT. That was his dream school. He interned there. He was super like prepared to go there and he didn't get in. And you can only assume that.
you can only assume. You can only. I'm gonna stop it there. You can only assume, but you don't know, right? Like, is it actually that? You know.
Because of affirmative action, because they have such a large Asian population that they want to admit other people.
Yeah, I was going to actually argue that it's more racist nowadays because it excludes so many Asian Americans from getting into universities who do deserve a spot and they can't get in because.
So, if you're ever wondering why that's the case, a lot of Asian people in the United States. Well, remember the Chinese Exclusion Act was like a thing that this country passed. It wasn't really legal. It was very, very difficult for someone from Asia to legally immigrate to the United States until 1965. So from that point, moving across, halfway across the world, a lot of people who are Asian or either Asian immigrants themselves or the descendants of Asian immigrants probably come from wealthy families because they probably had to be wealthy to come here. And so this is why you see a lot, wealthy people, especially educated wealthy people, far more likely to have children who are well educated, who can go to institutions of higher learning, and so this compounds. This is why that kind of thing happens. You can say it's racist or whatever, but like the point is to advantage the disadvantaged. And so in that case, people who are wealthy, come from wealthy, educated backgrounds, are not disadvantaged.
Because of affirmative action, which again,
but also
like
people
you were
consider
saying, was
racism
necessary at the
exclusively
time,
as
but now it's like
good for white people and
if you
bad for
have the skills
others.
to do it and you're in America, you can get in.
I don't think affirmative action is the worst thing, considering all the different types or aspects of a background you might take into account.
Oh, another smart move from Destiny. Notice he just let everyone talk. He listened, paid attention to what they were saying, but he didn't try to like talk over them like Alec was trying to do. He didn't try to like interject and get into little squabbles or whatever. He listened to what they're saying, and now I'm confident that he's formulating his response to be responsive to what he heard and something that they're likely to listen to.
Getting into college, whether they were in certain clubs, Boy Scouts, what type of classes they took, that might not be available to everybody. I don't think that factoring in the affirmative action is necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like because of everything you guys have said, the optics behind it are so horrible today that even if it is slightly beneficial in the long run for certain people, I think we can probably refocus most of that into figuring out like the class that people come from, the neighborhoods, the backgrounds or whatever, without it having to necessarily target race.
So this is excellent because he's reframing this as this is a solution to a problem that's real and needs solving. But the problem with affirmative action was that it was ineffective. This is phenomenal. This is exactly the thing. I'm glad I'm in agreement with him. But this is kind of what I was getting at when we started this topic, right? It's that it's not a problem in concept or like in intent. It's a problem in effectiveness. And so Destiny is framing this of like accepting the problem of optics with the issue, but reframing it of like, but the underlying issue is there, it's real, and there are solutions that we could have and we should work towards. It's really smart.
The only thing that I kind of wonder now that it's gone is instead of a black person being in school thinking like, man, am I here because I'm an affirmative action pick? Is it going to be a kid that is poor or a kid that's from a different zip code?
I think we should do away with all of it. It's just like
and where I thought he was going was to say like now that black kid who thinks, oh, am I only here because of affirmative action? Now he can think, oh, am I only not there because there's no affirmative action? Like the feeling exists, but what we need to solve is the actual problem.
Submit an application, no demographics.
So like, okay, this is a little bit like where the lefty part of me is annoyed at the liberal. No, just submit an application, no demographics. Yeah, that's cute and all, except some of that information is discernible. This is why, like the resume study I was talking about, they just put it's just based on a name. They're just like, oh, this guy's name is Mark. He's probably a white dude. Like they don't think about it out loud in those terms. They probably don't even notice that they're making that. They have that bias. But the people with the like white sounding names get callbacks way more than the black sounding names. And it doesn't matter. Like, does it matter like, okay, there's no demographics on there. When you submit a resume, it doesn't say like, oh, by the way, I'm white or I guess now job applications have them, but as far as I know, those aren't like factored in. Now, maybe in theory, it would be a good idea to have. Now, maybe you could say like, okay, then don't have names on there either. Like, have it only the credentials that are applied. Except there's still some of that too. If you see someone went to school in like Greenwich, Connecticut, you know that person's wealthy and probably white. You know, like you can't really separate it as opposed to like if you saw like, oh, someone who's from like Spanish Harlem, like, okay, they're probably not white. You know, like you can determine these things even just looking at credentials of like, oh, this is the school you went to. That's all. Like, I like it in concept, but it's, I think, in practice not possible. So we need a solution that is not just like color blindness. It doesn't work.
So why do they ask your sexuality? Like, why do they ask all that stuff?
Now I'm curious what the people who
So,
don't who like
if
affirmative action are going to say
affirmative
about it.
action accomplished its purpose, why do we still see the disparities that we do in the professional world?
Okay, Alec, I'm on board with you, except for the optic stuff. Yeah, like, I agree. Yes, it didn't accomplish its goal, but it's not an effective tool towards doing so, and that's why it's like kind of okay for it goes by the wayside. But that said, it is a really good framing. Like, I'm glad that he's pointing at like, let's look at the problem and not the issues with a proposed solution.
Workplace. If you average white wealth and compare it to black
Well,
wealth
that's a
total,
bad metric for this, but yes,
white
that's
people
also a
as
problem.
a whole have about 50 times greater wealth than black people as a whole per capita. So I just don't understand
And you can
why.
see in the text here at the screen, at the bottom of the screen. In the United States, the average black and Hispanic or Latino households earn about half as much as the average white household. I can't read it because of the
affirmative
bar.
action is
And only
accomplished
own
its
about
purpose.
15 to 20% as much net wealth.
Why do you assume that just because there is a disparity means it's because of a racial issue?
Well, because you have to. It's one of two things, right? It's either an issue of environment or of genetics, right? Like what else could be causing a racial division, right? Like there are divisions on racial lines, there are disparities along racial lines, and you go, okay, well, what's causing that? People like Alec would say it's an environmental problem. It's an issue of obstacles being in the way from people who otherwise would achieve the same, who would be equal members of society, from being able to be in the same position as their fellow countrymen. The only alternative you can really have to that is to be like, well, no, they're genetically worse, which I don't think the people here would agree with. But like they want to like shift the issue. They'll go like, oh, it's a cultural problem. Okay, but why is that culture different, right? Like they want to just say like, oh, it's like your fault for being bad, you individually. But it works on but they want to say that to a community, and it's just like that for no reason, you know, like.
What else would it be from?
Great question.
Upbringing, economic abilities.
What do you mean economic abilities? Like, and also why are upbringings the way that they are? The stopping at the first answer is something that was, when I realized I was doing it, it was really helpful for, I think, improving the way I look at the world. There was a little while where I was getting caught up in arguments like this. Like I was listening to people who would say like, oh, the gender wealth gap isn't real because men and women make different choices. And you stop there, right? You stop asking questions at that moment. But if you just ask why one more time, suddenly the problem reasserts itself. Why do men and women make different choices? Why are these upbringings different? What do you mean economic abilities? Do you think like white people are inherently more economically capable than black people? Like, what does that even mean?
Desire to.
So
Zip
it
code
was their
does
fault.
play a lot. If you grow
Okay,
up in a
great, yeah,
neighborhood
you're,
that
like,
experiences a lot of
yeah.
trauma, you're not as likely to do as well in school, which means you're.
Why did they grow up in a neighborhood that experiences a lot of trauma?
I mean, lots of people do.
Yes.
Right, why?
Specifically do
Yeah.
more black people?
It's great. I love the approach here. It's in a way the Socratic method. Ask why. Like ask why one more time. They have their like I don't have to think anymore answer. Now you go, okay, but why is that the case? Like it didn't have to be like that, or do you think it did because of their genetics being bad or whatever?
Government assistance programs.
Government assistance program. This is
What?
notice he's back on the welfare shit. He's like, no. Government assistance makes your life when the government gives you money, your life gets worse somehow. Like
Or redlining.
I mean, you can go into that if you'd like to, but let's take
It
a
is
look
relevant.
at the Great Societies Act, which was created to kick black fathers out of the home and get black mothers on welfare assistance.
Was that designed to do that? Like, oh man, this guy, I would bet. Hold on, let's see if we can find who this guy is. My dude played Dark Souls. Currently not super possible, but also thanks, buddy. Yeah, look at this. All right, here he's got his like. Oh no, this is Alec. That's the wrong person. Sorry, his name is Chandler. Oh, this is just his Twitter. Yeah, like here, Black Voices for Trump, Elon Stan. Yeah, this guy's like a political activist towards this end. That's why he keeps pointing at, hey, Cam Gal.
Things aren't beneficial for economics. These things aren't beneficial for actually paving a way for success for black children and black families. I mean, reducing a two-family household to a one-family household isn't going to make them the richest man in the world.
Notice he's acting like that it was a government policy. Like, he's already lied about being intended as a government policy, but notice he's acting also like the intent was for welfare was to separate families and kick men out of the house. It was the government that did this. That's not at all what happened. But he's going to frame it this way because he has a personal issue with social safety net programs.
It isn't even going to get them out of high school, nonetheless,
You mean
the ability
parent.
to even get to college.
You mean
Yeah,
two-parent?
the child, yes, but a two-parent household
Yeah.
in comparison to a one-parent household, that child is not going to be nearly as successful. That child is more
Yeah,
exposed to
but
being
and
sent in.
and so now he has his answer to the question of like why are there one parent households. He claims the government kicked men out of the house by offering welfare, which is on its face ridiculous and absurd, but I mean he'll pretend it's real, I guess. Like, could you really call him on it in a situation like this to get into the weeds of like how absolutely fucking stupid that is?
Into prison by doing crimes or not doing very well in school.
And the
So how are they
solution,
even
he
supposed to
says,
get that,
is to
that
get rid of welfare, the thing that
disparity
might be
shrunk
putting
if
food on
they
the
aren't
table
even
for
able to get out of the
these
community
families?
that is causing these problems for them.
Something I think that this conversation illustrates is that like affirmative action is literally the very end of the line of a lot of different parts of a person's life. And by that point, trying to rectify all of the inequities that have existed, to try to remedy any of that at the very end with affirmative action.
This
might
is a
just be
great,
too
like,
broad a brush, and maybe we'd
yeah.
be better served focusing on the earlier issues than trying to throw a kid who maybe can barely read at a 6th grade level into a college to hope that that's the thing that fixes the problem at the end of the line.
No, I don't think that's exactly what's happening. That thing he's talking about at the end with the 6th grade reading level person or whatever. But I like, again, like, notice how he's taking this what looks like a middle ground approach to bring people who would otherwise be opposed to actual solutions on board with him towards that end, right? Like, yeah, affirmative action is probably not a good solution to that because look at all these problems that come before it. So shouldn't we deal with those problems? And if he can get someone to agree with that, suddenly these conservatives are on board with actual programs that could help alleviate the issues that, in particular, lower income communities are dealing with. And like, why do they have worse schools? Why is their upbringing so much worse? Let's actually solve these problems, as opposed to just whining about affirmative action for this section. He's trying actively to be constructive and productive, and I think it's a really smart approach.
I think affirmative action wasn't really supposed to like send kids to Harvard that weren't prepared to go to Harvard. I think that's quite a myth.
It is,
in fact.
but
I think those that have the qualities to get to Harvard were before affirmative action could just completely overlook.
Oh, and by the way, like, there are versions of affirmative action that exist, and pointing at Harvard is a good example. People get in there because their grandpa went there, or their dad went there, or because their family donated enough money to get a wing of the school named after them or whatever. You think that's not affirmative action? Those people don't necessarily deserve to be there. Jared Kushner, by the way, is a great example of this. He's actually a cited example in the book Paying for Admission, which is just like, yeah, this happens all the time for rich people. Why can't it happen for poor people? Now, maybe it doesn't solve the problem. Maybe there should be different issues or different stuff involved with this. But like, people act like it only happens in favor of the otherwise disadvantaged. No, the rich do this constantly. They just don't call it affirmative action.
Clarence Thomas is like the perfect example. Regardless of what you think about him. He was able to get to Harvard because of affirmative action, because it was
donations get their kids
focused
accepted.
on,
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Finding people that were, again, like just overlooked for those
Affirmative,
ones.
but things ended up changing. It morphed into something else. So what started out as a good program of giving all black people or people with a lesser chance or lesser opportunity, it started out as that, and then it morphed and I'm not sure who morphed it, but it morphed into...
Hold. I was literally about to say, like, oh, she might be, like, an interesting person to point conversation at from the perspective of the liberals, to just be like, well, she's on board with the idea that that affirmative action was a good idea from the outset, and presumably would therefore think, like, the problem exists and needs solving. Until she started getting onto this conspiracy shit of, like, it got morphed and I don't know who morphed it, but, like, they are sticking their tentacle. Like, what the fuck is happening? Also leads to grade inflation. Don't anger the big donors if their child gets a bad grade. Yeah, like, money is a huge problem in education, and, like, but we want to act like the people who are getting unfair advantages are the people who grew up poor and barely managed to make it to a good school. Like, it's ridiculous. Now, I mean, again, affirmative action might not be the best solution to that problem, but maybe, like, but like, I don't like the presumption that the elite are earning the quote unquote elite, the rich are earning their way in and the poor are getting snuck in. It's often the opposite.
Okay, so now we have to have one black, one Hispanic, one this.
Well,
one
they don't
that,
have quotas. The quotas are not a
Hey,
thing.
talk to the corporations, talk to the people who hire, talk
That's
to the board
not like
members who
that
say
at
we need
all.
to have a woman on the board, we need to have a black on the board, we need to have a Latino,
They don't.
a Latinx, whatever, on the board. So it morphed from helping us into now,
Tokenization.
yes. So you have to have
Okay, this guy whining about tokenization, dude. The girl in green who's on your side has literally bragged about the advantages being a token has gained for her. But also no, it just doesn't work that way. And notice that she just didn't react. She was like, Alec is sitting there like, that's just not how it is, and she's like, but it is like that. It's not. Like, there aren't quotas for these things.
one of this.
It
one of
exists
that, and-
completely
when
in your
you
old
start
head.
with a country where people only hire you if you're white, that's necessary. And I know
Oh,
that
he's
you said that it
overstating the point,
started
but
good
yes,
and
he's
then ended
right.
whatever. And I don't think that affirmative action was perfect by any measure, but we still see really, really bad
Great.
inequality.
Redirect it
So
to the
if you're going
problem.
to get rid of affirmative action, what's the replacement?
Yes,
Meritocracy.
great. Don't say like, okay, cool, we can just leave it and get rid of the thing. We need to solve an actual problem. Now she's saying like meritocracy, but like the myth of the meritocracy is a contributive factor to these exact problems. Meritocracy only works if people have an equal opportunity to succeed, and they don't. Wealth helps you succeed. That's kind of the point of wealth. And this has compounding effects because, as it turns out, public schools are funded by property taxes. So if you live in a poor area, your schools are also worse. So what ability do you have to really demonstrate your merit if you're being taught by underfunded, overstressed teachers, as compared to someone who grew up in like some rich affluent area, has a class size of 20 kids, they have all the resources they could ever want. It's just not a fair playing field to begin with, and to pretend that it is so nefarious. Like, I don't know, like it's the fairy tale you tell yourself so you can go to sleep at night. It's not real.
There's no meritocracy in
Yes,
this
there
country. You look at Elon Musk; he's destroying Twitter.
Okay, I agree with you, Alec, but it would take so long for you to establish for these people that Elon Musk is a colossal moron and yet is rich anyway. I agree with you, especially, well, you might not know this, the guy on the end who's literally an Elon stan,
There's no meritocracy. That's ridiculous.
Well, first thing I want to bounce back to is it's not a myth that there are like minorities that are being put into colleges that they're not ready for. If you look at a lot of these top universities, including Harvard, Yale, etc., you're going to see a lot of minorities on academic probation because they are being placed in
I
universities.
think community
that they
colleges
not
are
ready
a
for.
fair
They're
playing
not cut
field. Would
out
you
for that.
agree? I'm not sure. I don't know enough about how they function, Kemgal. There are some things that could be or could not be. One of the big things is they might not be just because of who goes there. Rich kids don't go to community colleges. They're often really some community colleges are really good and anyone can enroll. Like, that's great, and I think that is really helpful. I'm just not sure about the funding. I've been to community college before, and Like we're talking like class sizes of 50 students with a wait list that's 50 students long, and uh like there are huge issues that go to that. Like funding is a huge problem. Like maybe, but I think there are issues. Like I don't think to be clear, I'm not saying like community colleges are bad and we should get rid of them so much as the good that they could do is being at a minimum, or the good they do is at a minimum not as much as they could do. Um, there are a lot of good things about community college. They are a lot cheaper, but they're not cheap enough where anyone can just go. You probably like if you have to put yourself through school, you're probably working full time to go to a community college in addition to all the work you have to do. Like that's already an issue. It helps, but it's not everything. And there are additional issues with like okay, because community colleges you have to pay for your classes. Well, someone who came from an underfunded high school or in like middle school and whatever probably needs to take remedial classes to catch up, which means they have to spend more to get to the same starting place, even with the good that community colleges could do. Like they're already at a disadvantage. There's already a problem there. Yeah, like I think the problem starts a lot earlier, and so like maybe community colleges help, but it's not enough. I don't know. Not really sure what my thoughts are here. I'm kind of just vamping.
That just yet. And it even just makes sense if you look at how much they have to achieve in order to get there.
It's better than
Asian
not having
students
them,
on
that's for
average
sure.
have to score 450 points higher than a black student in order to get in the same university. So if you think of the universities that have courses, etc.
I don't love that he's like redirecting. Like we're trying. The Alec and Destiny have both tried to redirect the conversation to the underlying problem that affirmative action was intended to help alleviate, and he keeps going back to like, oh, but the problem with affirmative action. Okay, like most people here agree that affirmative action wasn't helpful, but you don't want to talk about the actual problem and why it was there. You just want to whine about this policy that just got ended. Like it's not around anymore. It's gone. Like
that grade on a curve, you can only have so many people with an A, so many people with a
yeah,
B,
grading on a
etc.
curve is
So that
stupid and
means
shouldn't
that
happen.
The bottom percentile is going to fail. Who is most likely, just based on logic, going to be the ones failing? It's going to be the people who didn't have the credentials to get there in the first
Again,
place.
affirmative action doesn't put people who don't have credentials into these positions. It intends to prefer people from worse backgrounds when there are similarities in their credentials. It's not.
And then I have to bounce back to.
I want to get you on that point, because I would posit that the people who are least likely to have good outcomes in an academic setting are those who have to work 2 jobs, are those who have to drive there from home because they can't afford a dorm, are those who have to go into crippling financial debt. These are and have other stresses in their life. They can't afford a doctor, they can't afford a dentist, they can't afford anything.
I had to do
so
that too, though.
Those are the
That's
people.
not just black people. It's not just.
But it's.
Why are you piping up here? Oh my god! Like, yeah, this so far everything out of this liberal girl's mouth has been center right at best. Like I don't know what the hell. Yeah.
If we're looking at
Overwhelmingly,
straight numbers, there are more white people in poverty than black people.
Why would you look at straight numbers? You know he said that because he knows he's being dishonest. There's no reason you would ever put it that way if you were trying to be honest about it. Yes, in straight numbers, there are more white people in poverty than black people. It's also because there are the country is something like 60 to 65% white people and 15% black people. Yeah, of course, on raw numbers, there's going to be anything. If 2/3 of black people are in poverty, and they're not, but I don't know that number is like I pulled that number out of thin air. If 2/3 of black people are in poverty and 20% of white people are in poverty, there's still by raw numbers more white people in poverty, just because that's how numbers work, because that's how these but by percentage, black people are disproportionately poor, and by a lot. But he's pointing at the raw number thing with an intentional dishonesty. He wants to obfuscate.
If you look at the raw numbers, but if you
I don't know,
actually
what are the
understand what
wrong
you're talking
numbers?
about.
No
The
number
issue is
is wrong.
poverty in general, though. I don't think it's like who's in poverty. It's like poverty sucks.
Maybe
So this is what's called class reductionism, and while I think it could be leveraged for positive change, because if you alleviate class issues, then disproportionately minoritized racial groups will disproportionately benefit. it's not sufficient. It's not enough. Yeah.
Make college free, and maybe we want to have
If you have a
affirmative action
program-
wouldn't be that necessary.
And it'll get even more ghetto.
Also true. Yeah, like wow. All right, nice racism, buddy. But no, it's like that's a reasonable point. Like, yeah, what if college were free? Then a lot of these problems do kind of disappear. If college is free, even the people who can't, like, then the purpose of, for example, community colleges could be retooled. You could have the purpose of that of like, this is kind of the remedial school you go to if after high school you are not ready for college, but it doesn't matter because it doesn't cost you anything but your time. And then if you are able to operate in a college environment, which should be the only thing the applications are determining, then you go to college and you can learn. And education can be used as a balancing tool. It's supposed to be the great equalizer, but it's not, in part because it costs money to go to school, and if you don't have money, then you have to have a certain amount of money to get equalized, which doesn't allow for complete equalization.
If you have a program that says if you are under a certain income level, this is how we'll help you, that will overwhelmingly help black people at a far greater percentage.
This is what I was
than it
saying
will
about
help white people.
That's what I was saying about like about class reductionism possibly being helpful, a useful tool towards that end. But like, no, it doesn't. But like we didn't get to it, and it's not really on topic. It doesn't solve all the problems. Like the hiring issue, for example, isn't an issue of class. It's an issue of race.
Trump supports Black Lives.
Trump doesn't give a shit about anybody. Like, it's not that like, yeah. This is one thing I don't love that happens in Jubilee sometimes, is that only people from one side will agree with the thing, and then you just have an echo chamber conversation for a little bit. Now it seems like Alec is coming over, which is a little surprising to me. But I mean, as far as my opinion on this topic, Trump does not give a single shit about anyone but himself. And so it's not that he like hates black people necessarily, though I've heard he has like some pretty racist views about a bunch of stuff. It's just like black people are not him, and he probably looks at it as they are farther from being like him than white people, and that's like the way he approaches it. But like, yeah, Trump doesn't give a shit about anyone. He's the most self-interested person on the planet.
I think that President Trump supports all lives. I think
No,
he looks
he
at
doesn't.
all American citizens as equal.
Well, if that's true, he looks at them as equally garbage. But it's also not true because, like, I mean, you've heard his statements. You don't need me to go over it.
See him doing anything that would make you feel like he does not support Black lives. That's
Well, I mean, he calls Black Lives Matter protesters like terrorists and like sent in the fucking army, or no, was it the Navy or something like that, to like put down protest groups when the governor was like, nah, it's fine, don't do that.
Lead into the conversation of Black Lives Matter, which was a movement and an organization with so much corruption.
Yeah, and okay, by the way, the movement and the organization are two different things. Black Lives Matter as a movement is very different than Black Lives Matter as the organization. But of course, like, this fucker hates Black Lives Matter, both the organization and the movement.
Donald Trump not supporting that organization doesn't mean that he doesn't support Black lives. It just means that he doesn't support.
And notice how he's framing the conversation. The only reason you could think he doesn't support Black lives is because he doesn't support Black Lives Matter. But you're the first one talking. You don't know why someone would think that he doesn't support Black lives. But again, this is intentional framing. Both of the conservatives that are sitting down right now have done this repeatedly, of just framing things in like, you must be talking about this, even though there's no reason to think that.
The fraudulent organization that's stealing so much money from so many people to do absolutely nothing with.
And now redirecting it to the thing he hates. Now he wants to talk about like Black Lives Matter organization is a bad organization. Who cares? We're not talking about Black Lives Matter, the organization. We're talking about Trump and his opinion and his stance towards black people. Why are we talking about the BLM organization? It's completely irrelevant. Same thing like the other guy Chandler did with
cities, communities,
welfare,
lives, etc. So I don't see why someone would think that
destroying cities. Yeah, I don't know if you heard, but there are several U.S. cities burned to the ground. They don't exist anymore. They're not there. Complete rubble, turned to ash entirely because one building was on fire once, I guess.
Support Black lives.
Yeah.
I've heard him say he knows all the best black people. He has all the best black friends. I do.
C+ Trump impression? I'll go with C+ Trump impression.
You support black
Barely
people
passing.
all the time.
Or just like just
So-
over passing.
Sorry, that was a very bad impression, but
Thank you. I'm glad you're
I
aware.
don't think Donald Trump wants bad things to happen to black people. So in that respect, I think he does.
Those are not the same thing. I kind of agree with Alec here. Like, I don't think he necessarily wants bad things to happen to black people. Though I've heard he like has policies of like trying to avoid selling real estate to black people and Jews or whatever. More he just does not give a shit, right? Like he doesn't. But not caring at all is not the same as supporting. Or like not wanting bad is not the same as wanting good.
Support black lives, but the other side of that is he's not really doing anything. He didn't do anything as president, certainly, to uplift black people.
The economy affects black people.
Yeah.
He did not improve. Yeah, okay, that is true. He also didn't do good things for the economy. So like, all right, cool, good talk.
One of the biggest things I
What did he do for the
supported
economy?
personally. Well, yeah. We don't. We'll get into that one. later.
Driving?
One
What?
of the biggest things he did is-
Wait, literally what? Did he say driving? What? Do you mean like driving on the driving range? Because that's like the only thing he did during his. What the fuck are you talking about?
He secured permanent funding for HBCUs, one of the largest increases we ever saw for HBCUs, personally done by his administration, among many other things.
Oh, that's cool.
The First Step Act, which, there's a lot of debate about whether...
I don't believe, by the way, the things this Chandler guy says. He's lied about so much already. So like, I'll wait to see if people push back on this kind of thing, or if it's even really relevant. But like, if that's true, like, all right, neat.
It was really the best thing to do, but that was definitely a kiss of love to the black race. Freeing Alice Johnson for menial drug crimes she committed in the past that had her locked.
So notice how we went from a systemic thing. Okay, that's kind of reasonable, and now we're acting like he let one person out of prison. Okay, and what does that have to do with literally anything?
Up. She did
One
not get to
person
see
is
her
not.
family for
One person is not like the black race or whatever,
years.
And he's going
Yeah,
on
but
and
that's
on about
not
it.
like, okay, I did say I agree, but I agree in the sense that Donald Trump doesn't literally want bad things to happen to black people, like I think a lot of conservatives do.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. I figured Alec was here so that it wasn't just these two circle jerking each other about how much Trump loves blacks or whatever. And he was like, well, I guess I can justify being here to myself by just being like, well, I don't think he literally wants to like murder every black person by himself, like, so I guess that's good enough,
So I think that he just says the most yeah, I do think that. I think he says the things that will get him elected. So
I don't even
think
agree with
he-
that necessarily. I don't even know that how much Trump cares about getting elected. I think he just cares about like dodging responsibility for his crimes or whatever. Just like being able to do what he wants to do. It didn't seem particularly interested in being president. I was rather swayed by the Renegade Cut video about whether Trump wants to be president, and I kind of agree. I don't think he does.
He has any personal grudges against most people. He just says the most popular thing. So
The thing that will
think,
get
like,
him the
Ron
most
DeSantis
applause.
Would be, Ron DeSantis would be somebody that I think
think-
actually wants black people to be hurt. So by
Yeah,
that
that's
standard,
probably true, yeah.
Yeah, Donald Trump supports black lives by leaps and bounds.
You think Donald Trump says the most popular thing?
No, I think he
Yeah.
says the most,
Really?
the thing that will get him the most applause. And now, sometimes the most popular thing in the room that he's in is not necessarily the most popular thing. So like Xavier is acting like that's a ridiculous statement, but when you're in a room full of Republicans, saying things that are generally controversial might be the most popular the most popular position in the room.
Yes,
Then why do so many people hate him?
he got elected as president.
What-
Yes,
what?
he did.
Yeah,
He didn't win the popular vote.
Yeah, Alec, you're
That's a-
way
that's
off
Your
base
side
here.
wants to say that.
that's
Yeah.
a liberal talking.
I'm
point.
helping you here. I'm trying to see the logic in this. Obviously, he says things to be elected. He was-
Because what Alec meant is that he says things that will get him the most applause, and sometimes the most, and again, like sometimes the most popular statement, like the most popular statement for the room he's standing in or for the people he's going to interact with, he's gonna get more adulation from the right than he will from the left. He was a Democrat for a while and then switched to being a Republican before running for president. Like this isn't weird or anything like that. But when you put it in the terms of, oh, he'll say what's the most popular thing, yeah, well that's not it's not true. What he's saying isn't the most popular thing isn't the most popular with people in the country. It's the most popular with people in the room with him.
a politician very similarly to how Joe Biden did, except Joe Biden actually has a history of racism.
If he said things that people didn't like, he
Notice again, redirect to a thing I hate. What we're talking about Trump? Oh, but Joe Biden's actually racist. No one said anything about Joe Biden. Why are you talking about it? And and in a conversation where nobody here is claiming that Trump is racist. So why are you pointing at that? Because it's right. It's calculated. It's that. This is what I mean about like it. They grab people, and some number of them are like just people we picked up, and some of them are like I'm a political operative whose like platform is about mainstreaming conservative ideas and like active, and I have media training and shit. Like,
He wouldn't have been our president.
So you like everything that Donald Trump says? You think everything he says is popular?
I love a lot of the things he says. I think he's hilarious. When he said big water, that was one of my favorite quotes. Big water.
Water, big water, ocean water.
He has the funniest one-liners.
He's like, I don't know, like Alec, you're making good efforts, buddy, but like you are getting led around by the conservatives way too much.
I love a lot of the things he says. As far as policy, he sucks, but
I'm just shocked you're wearing a Hunter Biden hat. He likes a different kind of one line.
oh, I know conservatives love talking about his.
No, Coke.
No. They love talking about his cock. No, the Coke thing, they're like kind of whatever about. The fucking Marjorie Taylor Greene was putting up his nudes in Congress. Nah, like let's not pretend you care about the cocaine. But notice the redirection. You have a Hunter Biden hat. Let's talk about a thing we hate and not talk about the thing we're supposed to talk about.
Trump is less of the issue and more so the people that support him, like Die Hard. They facilitate that kind of like hate, I think.
By the way, I agree with this. As much as this sounds really weird, no, I completely agree. Trump says the most popular thing for the people in the room. And the people who support him. Trump is a symptom. He's not the cause of anything. He's the symptom of what Republicans have been pushing for years,
for
decades.
a lot of people, not just black people, but like.
I mean, this man took out like a full page in a newspaper calling for the public execution of 5 black kids. His
yeah,
hotels,
that's true. I
all
forgot
his
about that.
businesses
For those of you who don't know, this is the Central Park 5, a group of 5 kids that were alleged to have like. I don't know if they were alleged to have killed this person, but alleged to have raped this girl in Central Park. They were since exonerated. The courts like was like a $5 million settlement or something for like what they've been put through. And after all of this, Trump was like calling for their execution. People who did not commit this crime.
Rampant history of denying black people apartments or whatever. So
yeah, I forgot about that. I should not have stepped forward.
Look, I mean, Donald Trump cares about Donald Trump.
Yep.
So I don't think he really cares about anyone, I guess, unless you're like super rich or whatever.
When you look at his history on racial issues, whether it's the shithole countries comment, the plethora of comments he made about Mexican people.
And now Dusty's like doing kind of a similar thing that the conservatives kept doing of subtly shifting the topic of conversation. But I think in this case, it's onto the more relevant thing. Like, does Trump supports black lives? It's such like a meaningless statement. Let's talk about what we actually want to talk about, which is he a racist? And so now, like, based on the context of what Destiny's getting at, he's shifting it that way.
Just the comments he's made about Muslims, the idea that Trump cares at all about some particular racial minority, I think is a little bit silly. I think Trump will say whatever he needs to say to rile up his base and to get elected.
And that is the better way of putting what Alec was trying to say. He'll say what he needs to say to rile up his base. It's not the most popular thing in the country. It's the thing that will get him the most applause from the people who love him.
Necessarily think those statements come from a place of hatred.
No one said he came from a place of hatred.
Specifically, if you pray 5 times a day towards the east or towards Mega based on wherever you are, you're a bad person. I think he was saying if you like to fly planes into towers or behead people or throw people off a building,
now, that's
maybe
cute.
you're not the most virtuous person out there.
Yeah, that's cute for you to like pretend that's what he was saying, but remember his ban from his travel ban from Muslim countries wasn't like, oh, let's just make sure they're not terrorists. It was, oh, this place is full of Muslims. They're not allowed in here because Muslims be like that. It was not like an anti-terrorism measure because we already have extremely strict vetting as far as people coming into this country. It was just like, nah, no Muslims allowed, dude. They just be like that, man. That was the policy.
I support
the act of
Trump
pretending
because,
like he doesn't.
He made the economy good, and so the
He did
economy
not.
then impacted black people, white people, Latino people. It impacted everybody. But Trump, he didn't think specifically, I don't think, about black people. He thought about himself, and he thought about how can I make America great for me.
I actually agree with this.
And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go with this guy. And the reason I'm going to go with this guy is because if he can make America great and he can make that it rise for everybody,
No.
benefit.
Wait, what the fuck? You were so close. You were already talking about, like, he doesn't care about other people. He just wants to make things good for him. And you're like, oh, I'm going to benefit from that. But that's not how... not everything that benefits Donald Trump benefits you. How do you not see that? Like if he gives, for example, cuts taxes on people who make upwards of, like in the highest tax bracket, basically just billionaires or whatever, that doesn't affect you at all, or at the very least not positively. The only effect it has is now your government has less money to function, and maybe your street doesn't get its pothole fixed because they don't have the money for it or whatever. Not, it wouldn't be that specifically, but you get the idea. Like, I don't understand how she doesn't make that connection of, like, not everything that's good for one person is going to be good for another person.
So that's why I went, and that's why I voted for him. That's why I supported him.
How does that specifically benefit black people? Again, he has.
Well, okay, slight misstep. She didn't step forward as him being in support of Black lives. She might not think that it's good for black people, like specifically.
He's a businessman, but he's also a racist businessman, and
True.
like well documented. So.
Yep.
So like I do
like this guy's approach. I think his name is Jacob. I think he's been
not?
doing so. Who's talking about Biden? Why are we talking about Biden? Why are we whataboutism? Like, why are we doing the whataboutism? We're talking about Trump. Who gives a shit about Biden? Sure, Biden's racist. Can we talk about the issue at hand?
Biden's not.
Cool,
Yes,
Biden's
he is.
racist.
He created the crime bill.
But we're talking
So
about Trump.
That's regardless of the
Well,
point.
address the Central Park 5. That's what you brought up, right? How do you feel about that?
Well,
he took
actually,
that full page
okay,
after they were.
so-
This is good. Hold her
He
to a
wanted them
thing.
to be killed,
Well,
That is why I didn't
executed,
step forward,
just because they were
because of
black.
That story.
And
But,
he bars people from attending his businesses or like renting apartments from all.
This
his,
was a
like,
mistake though.
stupid
Like,
Trump-
Destiny was trying to hold one person to one position. Like, how do you justify this? And the talking getting, like, it kind of alleviates the pressure on
Towers.
her.
I just,
It's not
like-
helpful.
I think Trump at that point.
Like,
was
notice
many
she's not- she
people
hasn't
in this
answered
room,
yet.
Particularly liberals, a victim of the media. I think he
What?
was scared. I think he was ashamed of the things that he
What?
heard in the news and wanted to take action himself as a businessman, not as a
Why are
racist.
you infantilizing him?
I don't like also real quick because people keep bringing up this comparison to the '93 crime bill from Biden. That crime bill, this was at the height of like violent crime and the crack epidemic in
Yeah,
the United
that's
States.
something people
the
don't-
Congressional
yeah.
Black Caucus supported that crime bill. Everybody in the United States supported that crime bill. The idea that that crime bill was like some racist piece of legislation that Biden was just wheeling out because he hates black people, and that's somehow comparable to the Donald Trump's treatment of the Central Park 5 that were already exonerated. That wasn't a victim of the media. The media said they were.
So I hate that he has to do. Like, I don't know. I don't know that he necessarily needed to do this because the Biden is completely off topic, and it's just like falling for the whataboutism. But he's right. Yeah, like the '90s, I think '92 was like an all-time high of crime in the United States or something like that. Like for whatever reason, early '90s had an immense amount of violent crime. And so, yeah, like everyone was on board for the crime bill. Now we look back on it, it was like, this is pretty shitty. But I agree, it wasn't a racist thing. The thing is, like, we should probably be refocusing this at Trump. Yeah, like, what? But this is not the. Yeah, I mean, Destiny even said this. This is nothing in comparison. This is not like some racist act. Whereas the Central Park 5 thing, like, what else could it be? And we were trying to hold Renee to her thoughts on this. I think her name was Renee. But it keeps getting, like, now everyone else has spoken except for her. Like, I hope he finishes this by pointing,
They were
like,
done.
hey,
They
answer for
were
this again,
exonerated in
please.
court. They weren't there.
As I understand it, the prosecutor of the 5, he was a black guy, and so
Oh,
in
okay.
being a black
What does that
guy,
have
he
to do
went
with
and
anything?
he looked at all the evidence and said these
What?
guys are guilty.
Black
No,
people can
what?
also be racist again.
And also, it's the police. The police are highly motivated to just get someone, like, to pin the crime on someone so they can say they've got it, like, they've dealt with this issue. They're okay. Like, this has been noticed, by the way. Like, the implication of her argument is like, well, the police clearly thought figured out they were guilty, and they can't possibly be biased because they're black. Therefore, the implication is the exoneration was in error. They actually were guilty, and the reason why that would be relevant here is because that would be saying that Trump was correct when he called for their execution. Notice what she's saying as contrasted of where she needs to get with that statement. What she's implying is the connection to this conversation.
Against other black
Or
people.
just make mistakes.
So if anybody does anything you disagree with in regards to the Central Park 5, even if they themselves are a black person, they're just a self-loathing black person. They're just
Well, no. Well, see, this is why you don't say like what Alex said, and what you say what Destiny said of like, or they just make mistakes, or they have motivations to get someone blamed for this.
a
You know?
racist black person.
If they disagree
That
with me, they're
prosecutor was
racist.
doing his job.
That's my policy. If they disagree with me, they're racist.
Now he's joking, but
I
he's going to
think
take it
Trump-
seriously.
I
like
think
that's a
Trump
hilarious
has
policy.
shown a history of ignorant at best and racist at worst behavior. I
Yep.
didn't vote for him or Hillary because I just don't see him as a conservative hero. I don't even think he's a conservative.
Fake
personally.
conservative. I voted Trump in 2016, just so you all know. So, I'm just saying.
So I need
that
I
explains a
need
lot.
you to elaborate on if people disagree with you, they're racist.
He
just
was
in general.
joking.
I was just
He's
kidding.
just,
Just like
one
the
of those
hat.
kind of
It's,
moments.
sorry if I triggered you. I'm sorry.
You made
No,
a
I'm
point,
Oh, good
you made
shit.
a point
Okay.
a couple minutes back where you said he just kind of says these things to rile up his base. Why does he need to do that at the expense of black people then?
He doesn't do that at the. I am a member of his base, and I'm sitting there like, oh man, this is amazing. And I don't know. You can call me
So
self-loathing. You
calling,
can call me self
so you're
you can call
saying
me
calling
racist.
for
I
the
can call you
public
stupid.
execution of 5 black men that were exonerated to
When
rile
has he
up
done
his
that
base?
during the campaign trail? He didn't. Do
Oh,
that when he was
only during the campaign trail matters? Why are we drawing the line here? This guy is very calculating. Like, Chandler, I think, is a very smart guy. The problem is he's kind of evil. Like, he's extremely calculating in how he's presenting stuff. Like, only the stuff of the campaign trail could possibly matter. Trump was birthed anew when he began his campaign, and definitely wasn't a human being with thoughts and experiences and biases before that moment. He sprung up into existence. These things from before matter.
Well,
Again,
was a
it's
scared businessman
everything.
in New York
It's
feeling
everything
bad.
Steve said about the comments about Muslims, the comments about Mexican immigrants. Why
Not
does he
never
need?
about Mexican immigrants, never about Muslims, about terrorists, and about
That's also not true. He's actively lying again. No, he was pretty explicit.
criminals and rapists.
I-
These are very important to
Yeah,
look at.
okay, but who are the criminals and rapists? He was like, when the Mexican government sends its people, they're not. The Mexican government doesn't send people. He goes, they don't send their best. They say they're rapists, they're criminals, and some are probably good people. He's talking about Mexican people, not criminals and rapists. He's accusing Mexicans of being criminals and rapists. And Chandler has to know this. He's just lying.
To make, and if you believe
I
that
think
what
you
fed the media
understand,
about,
or
oh, it's
I
all
think
Mexican immigrants, I think it's more of you being, oh man, these poor Mexicans, they need to be
I think
supported.
Jacob
It's
was
more of
really
that
close to doing what he needs to do,
savior
which is
complex.
call him out. Call him a
Wow,
liar.
What was
we're
the
back
rationale
again.
behind axing or trying to axe DACA? Were these people were registered with the federal government? They were in school. They were doing everything that they needed to do. They had no home elsewhere. They were brought into this country as minors. Like, what's the explanation for
I
that?
think
Like,
that requires more nuance. Like I mentioned before, I think
We're not
there's
going to
a
engage in
critical-
that, right? I'm not going to engage in that nuance, but it requires the nuance,
I think
Why
there
would
were
you
some
wanna kick
people
him out?
feeding him bad policy advice, thinking, "Oh, this will be really good for your base," and he's doing
is
a
he
lot.
a Jake
Just
Hewer?
that's
infantilizing
okay.
him.
That's okay if we feel that way. But
So,
at the end of the
if I take responsibility for something, if I say he has responsibility for something, well then you're right. But if I'm saying, well, maybe there are some people around him advising him falsely,
Dude.
it's
Well,
empath-
because okay, he has to understand this. Because every time Chandler says cops to Trump doing a bad thing, it's someone influencing to do the bad thing. He has never once said, "Oh yeah, Trump fucked up on this thing." It's always someone led him to this. That's why it's
He was the
infantilizing.
president.
There's no good way.
He
to
called the
this for him.
shots.
Yeah, like
What are
at the
you
end of the day,
talking
he made the
about?
decision. What
only
he couldn't
path
say
forward
no
to
to these
solving
bad
illegal immigration
ideas.
starts with amnesty for everybody here. The reality is there's some 10 to 15 million illegal immigrants here. We're not deporting them all.
With the people who are already here, that's a lot more of a messy, nuanced conversation. But as far as people coming in, I do think we need stronger borders and actual vetting happening.
And I just
Note to people watching: immigrants of all kinds, legal or otherwise, commit less crime than natural-born citizens. The vetting isn't a problem. We also have an extreme amount of vetting for. We have some of the most difficult, most stringent immigration policies among countries in the developed world. It's not actually an issue, but it's something to distract from, because the point the conservative wants to get to is we need to let fewer people in for any number of reasons. Some people are just xenophobic, some people believe the lies about criminality, some people are just racist or whatever. Like, there's a lot of things that could be the reason, but they just want to justify the gut feeling of keep them out. Like, that's all they're trying to do. So the vetting thing, she doesn't actually care about vetting. She doesn't know what the vetting policy is or what needs to be changed about it. What she knows is that she wants fewer people to come in, and if the vetting is more strict, fewer people will come in.
want to say, in Ronald Reagan's day, he was given the promise. He said, look, if you go ahead and you pass this particular bill, we'll give these people amnesty and we're done. And it didn't happen. We didn't. Illegal immigration continued even after Reagan
what?
already said we would give these people amnesty.
But he didn't give them amnesty, I don't think. Let me double check. To minor children of parents. So some people. Yeah, what the hell? Yeah, people under the age of 18 who are legal immigrants. Yeah, it's not blanket amnesty for for those 10 to 15 million or whatever we're talking about. And yes, there will always be illegal immigration as long as there are laws about who is allowed to move where. You can't literally get rid of all of it.
So that's why we get a burr up our butt, because he had already done it.
No, he didn't
Hopefully
do
the
it.
devil's giving him amnesty.
True. That's terrible.
No, that's
That's
base.
bad. Yeah, I don't know. It's bad in this context because optics is such a big deal, but like, fuck Reagan. Yeah, I don't know.
Ninth circle, baby.
My political beliefs have changed from the past.
I do kind of like this. And I expect, everybody.
I grew up in a
Yeah,
conservative
not
household,
surprising.
actually, in Ohio.
I would be
And,
sitting up here
my
with them, by the way,
parents
if
were
I were in
always
this
pretty
position.
political, so I always stayed political. I was very religious as a teenager. Sometime during college and then afterwards, especially during COVID, my sister actually indoctrinated
Don't
me
use
into
that word.
a more
No,
leftist,
don't say indoctrinated.
position.
They're gonna think that's like
And,
brainwashing or whatever.
I
Even though
overcorrected
that
a little
like
bit. I started becoming pretty cringy as far as like, sit down and let the minorities all talk, right? Don't say anything, don't speak over them, etc. They would, it was like the whole you can't speak over Candace Owens even if she's literally a Nazi kind of thing.
No,
So,
yeah. Look at the eye roll. I knew this guy was gonna fucking hate that. Yeah, I mean, she literally has gone to bat for Hitler, but he's like, no, she can't be a Nazi because she's black. Like, they fucking love the liberal id poll when it deflects from them, but like, nah, man, she literally has gone to bat for Hitler.
I stand by that. So I kind of leveled out, thankfully, and I'm less cringe now.
Did you? Are you?
I cringed.
This is leveled out.
Okay, so you cringed at a statement. Okay, never mind.
Imagine if we would have been here a year ago.
I mean, maybe I am being cringe. Who cares?
So I grew up conservative, but I did have more left-leaning ideas about like Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, and I was watching a lot.
By the way, this is a little bit of a meaningless question. Like as I'm noticing as she's talking, because like my political beliefs have changed from the past. Yeah, no shit, everybody changes. But even she said like the implication, I guess, is like in a kind of big way, or at least that's how I took it. But she's like, oh, I've always been a conservative, but there are certain ideas that have changed. Like, yeah, no shit. I like once you start talking about it in that context of like, yeah, everybody's beliefs have changed.
YouTube, and I did agree that Black people were oppressed and all of these different things, and that we were kind of got the short end of the stick. And during 2020, when there was everything crazy was happening, and I started organizing rallies against the mandates because I thought that they were just totally unconstitutional and un-American. And then George Floyd dies, and
or is she talking about
was,
mass mandates?
Enraged,
They're
like
very much
else.
not unconstitutional.
And then it started to become this weird
Or weird.
political agenda masquerading or behind his face. Like it just the face
it's
of
not,
what was.
No, the political agenda was not subtle or being hidden. These were actively political protests. That's what protests are. What the fuck are you talking about? It's not. They weren't like. The Black Lives Matter wasn't like, all right, we're gonna protest, but nobody tell them that we have things we want. They were very open about things that they wanted: police accountability. They wanted less police, less violence. Like there was a lot more stuff. I'm forgetting some of it, but like police accountability is a very easy one of like, yeah, there were things they wanted politically. That wasn't a secret.
Was actually happening started to peel off, and I was like, oh, I mean, I would counter protest BLM activists at my town square when I lived in Texas, and they were some of the most just bitter, vile, horrible people you could ever.
Here we go again. What was it, Carolyn Borosenko? The like, I believed lefty things, and then I met a person who was mean, and then I changed all my views. Like, I don't know, there are no mean people who are Republicans. Like, David Duke, probably not the nicest guy to someone like you, I would imagine. Like,
me. Meanwhile, like the Confederate group that would protest there against them also, they were like the nicest people ever.
And this, by the way, is the importance of optics as well. Like, imagine if the people on the left were just nice. Just be nice, man. Like, it's good to be nice to people in general, but like, when engaging in political activism, like you want allies, you want people to fight with you, and being a dick doesn't help.
Ironically.
I grew up in a Democratic, not a Democratic household, but kind of apolitical, but everybody was Democrat. And then I got.
By the way, I think that's a lot more common than people who are really into politics will seem to think of. Like, politics isn't that big a deal for a lot of people, or at least they don't think it is. Like, it's involved in their lives, but they want to live a life that is in their mind devoid of politics. Now, it's always there. It's constant. But they want to just, like, go to school, go to work, raise a family, and not really think about the machinations of power, but feel like they're forced to. That said, that's not how things are. The machinations of power are going to affect you. You're not getting, like, dragged into this arena. You were trying to act like you weren't there in the first place. But I think coming to terms with the fact that people look at things this way, I think is really important. Just in terms of having conversations with people.
A job, and when I got a job and I saw all the taxes come out, and I started looking to the left and to the right and going, oh,
this is another issue. A lot of people will see politics as soon as it affects me and no more and no further, and like that would be the totality of how they look at it. I've heard people like Andrew Yang because of his garbage UBI proposal, because, like, well, I get $1,000 a month and that's as far as I've thought about it. And so you have this exact thing, like, I have to pay taxes, that's bad, fuck taxes, let's be a conservative so that my children won't have a school to go to because there's no taxes to pay for it. Like, people will stop thinking about anything past the first thing that affects them. And this is part of why, like, it's important to have, like, the political understanding outside of that. Like, taxes are kind of cool. I like that there are hospitals, like, but she's looking at it like, oh, I have to pay so much in taxes. That must be that I must move to the right. Because you think, like, I think a lot of people, especially people with right-wing sentiments, and camps do this all the time, just assume that the aspects of the world that exist are there and that will always be the case no matter what happens. There will always be hospitals and roads and schools, and it doesn't matter if I pay taxes, so why should I pay taxes? Even though, no, there are reasons why those things exist, and they didn't used to, and part of it has to do with public funding.
Over here, and I said, you know what, after Reagan, I'm just going to go ahead and declare myself a Republican, and I've been a Republican ever since.
My mom is pretty liberal. She married my stepdad when I was like 15, 16 in high school, and he's super conservative, like, loved Trump, diehard Trump fan, and they had a lot of
stories are interesting,
back and forth, hearing the two sides, like people who are on such polar opposites, just like argue all the time about.
By the way, you've probably heard me talk about this on the channel before. I take issue with the idea of the two sides when it's like a conservative and a Democrat, or like and a liberal, because it gets further left than that, and conservatives have no problem pulling further right than conservative and right into fascist. But, like, when you look at it as the two sides, someone like me who wants something way further left than liberal seems like a radical, wacky extremist whose ideas are absurd and can't possibly have good reasons. But then, the guy who's just a little more conservative than the conservative and is actually just a fascist, but calls himself a little bit more conservative than the conservative, like that, that's reasonable. He's just a little outside the box, and it's absurd because, like, especially given that the Democratic Party isn't exactly a left-wing organization.
Stuff, seeing that there's a lot of similarities in both sides, like the far radical left and the far radical right, they have a lot of similarities. They just don't want to come and, like, see it.
I started off actually kind of similar to you. I went to a Jesuit high school. I grew up very conservative. My mom is Cuban, so ride or die Bush supporter, who is now a ride or die Trump supporter. I think the point in my life when I was the most, like, libertarian was probably the lowest point of my life financially. And I think it's because something that conservatives do really well is they make you feel like you can always, like, succeed as long as you work hard enough.
But that's a myth.
Progressives and liberals suck at. That you're a victim of systemic racism, you're black, so you're going to be discriminated against, you're a woman.
Now, you can still succeed, but, like,
Republicans will tell
it
you,
is a
listen,
myth.
Work hard, you can do whatever you want, like, just as long as you're willing to put in the work. And I felt that way up to the moment where I was losing my house, where I had an ex-girlfriend that was pregnant, where I had been fired from my previous job. There was a whole bunch of horrible stuff going on in my life, and I very, very luckily got into online content creation. And from there, as I started to make more money, I started to pay more taxes. When I get older and I look at taxes that come out of my paycheck, I care a little bit, but it was just so funny to me that back when I was making $15,000, $20,000 a year, I'm like, I gotta vote for the lower tax bracket, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm barely paying any taxes anyways. And now that I'm older, like if the government wants to take, a few, 10, 20, whatever, how many more $1,000 out.
You just said you worked hard.
I did, but I got...
Yeah, he did, but that working hard didn't make him wealthy. What made him wealthy was getting into the content creation, which he did work hard at. But Destiny has often said he was working his ass off before that. He was like a carpet cleaner. He was not. This was not like a cushy, we don't try very hard life or whatever. He was working very hard, and it didn't like suddenly give him all this wealth or whatever. The people who work the hardest are often the poorest. They have to work that hard or they'll starve. Like it's a myth that like you think Elon Musk works harder than the single mom with 3 jobs and 2 kids or whatever. Like, absolutely not.
Got very, very, very lucky doing so. Very lucky.
You think it's just luck?
It's not just luck, but
No.
the difference is that...
And by the way, this is something Destiny has talked about those on his channel. Like one of the things he mentions when people talk about this, like, well, he got into online content creation, but he was partially able to do that because he grew up in a family that afforded him the latitude to get into gaming, to learn how computers work, and to know about online content creation as a thing. Like a lot of people don't really have that, and part of it is right place, right time. He got into it a long time ago. Like streaming was not much of a thing when he was doing it. Like a lot of it is kind of luck, but not luck of I got my name pulled out of a hat as to which content creator gets big. It was about luck of his circumstance.
Born into a wealthier family, you can make so many more mistakes in life.
Yeah.
And when you're born poor, you get like 1 or 2 before your life is over, and that's really sad to me.
Yeah, so I used to be a liberal. I voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016.
Hell yeah.
As much as I regret that now.
I'm sure you
My family
do.
was pretty left-wing. Some of the people in my family were like radically left, like would refer to white people as blue-eyed, red-headed devils, things of that nature.
Oh, hold on. I don't know that I call that radically left-wing. I would call that racist. Like, what?
And as I got older, I actually started being really outspoken for BLM. I was supposed to be on a reality show.
So you
teaching
used to be
people
cool.
How to be a BLM activist. At the time, I did a deep dive on BLM, and I started to realize all of these lies. So
he got radicalized to the right because he was in a bad org. Yeah, I've heard bad things about the BLM organization. But he should know better than most that the movement and the organization are not the same thing. Holy shit.
What else am I being lied to about? And I started looking.
And suddenly I was like, you know what? You're right. It would be better if people who were having a hard time in life had fewer options. Fuck them.
Questioning my own loyalty to being on the left.
I personally think both sides.
I was
tend
curious
to
to
be
hear more
racist
from him,
in
but
different ways. I don't think the government is on the side of the.
So again, this is that both side shit. Like, yeah, the Democratic and Republican Party are both pretty racist. As it turns out, there are more political beliefs than just those two parties. Progressives tend to be a lot less racist, but sure, whatever.
In general, and that's just me being, a radical.
When I was young, I used to jump for joy and say, oh yeah, Obama, black president, that's so amazing. He's the same color as me. But when I started to do more research, one of the biggest things I was confused about is, well, why is he a Democrat? What is a Democrat? I did more research about the Democrat Party. And sure, you guys are going to pop off about the head saying, oh, there's a party switch in the Southern strategy and all these.
Notice he's acting like it's ridiculous, the thing that's true and happened, but he's preempting it so that it seems ridiculous for anyone to take issue with his position. It's poisoning the well. Like he knows he's doing this, by the way.
Things,
which is true.
Which you may say is true. I don't
It
think
is.
it's true at
Yeah,
all.
it is. I mean, you're allowed to be wrong. And my guess is he's too smart, and 2, he seems too knowledgeable about what he's talking about for me to really buy that he doesn't believe it's real. I think he knows he's lying.
You may think I'm wrong.
That's by the way, why I keep calling him a liar specifically. He has demonstrated too consistently how smart he is, and so I don't trust that it's merely he doesn't get it or he doesn't understand. I think he knows what he's doing.
One of the biggest questions I had was, why is Obama in the same party as the people that started the KKK, the same people that voted against the Civil Rights
I mean,
Act?
like, but something I want to note about this? Why do people never ask that about the Republican Party? Like, why were the or like or even I guess more of in different circumstances. Like, why were the people who were in favor of Jim Crow the same people who like, why are they part of the same party as Oh wait, no, hold on. No, that's not the line. No, it's like there's a because the switch happened to both sides, right? Like why do people never go like, oh, why does yeah, I'm losing the thread. You know what I'm talking about. Like, why do people never go like the Republicans are now on the same side as the people who were opposed, or like or the same people who liked Jim Crow are Republicans now? Like, why does nobody? But
The
nobody
same people that
agrees
are
to being on board
talking
for
about how
Jim
black
Crow. Or
people
whatever.
aren't able to accomplish anything.
And by the way, the Southern strategy like keeps pretending like it's not real. People are on record as stating that this is an intentional thing. Lee Atwater has like a very famous quote about like, well, you know, and you would say the N word, but then you get in trouble for saying the N word. So now instead you say like forced busing or whatever, you know, like.
Be on welfare and need to be promoted with affirmative action and things of that nature.
I also, in terms of, I guess, of my political journey, I was raised conservative, actually. And then high school became, I guess, sort of apolitical. And then throughout college and I guess just throughout my life since then, I think I guess you can call me a progressive, you can call me, you know, socialist, whatever you, but I guess that's, in the area of where I fall. You said that you were a Bernie fan in 2016 and then you transitioned to being, I guess, more conservative. I guess, I don't know, to me, Bernie Sanders, from what he said to what you think now, what was the shift?
For me, it was socialism, because back then I was a very broke.
Bernie's
college kid,
not
and
a
I just had this
socialist.
mentality that everything should be free, and I was feeling a bit entitled.
That's not
like
what
everything should be
socialism
handed
is.
to me because I was black, because I was very much in that mentality. As I learned more about free markets, as I learned more about capitalism, I started to appreciate that much more. I started to appreciate small business much more.
So many misunderstandings are packed in here. I'm just gonna move past most of them.
Government, low regulations. I just started to like that much more. But I would say.
By the
just
way, we've
more-
had this before. Let's just say the 1920s and 30s were not particularly known for being, or I guess the teens through the 30s were not particularly known for being great times for people.
When it comes to economics, I don't agree with him.
Reparations are necessary.
There's a part of me that's like a little on the fence about this question because we've talked about reparations in the past. I don't know. I guess I think they are. Yeah, I guess I'd be here with these.
When
guys.
we talk about reparations, I think that doing reparations in the way that a lot of people think of it, where we just give it to black people, I'm not an expert on this, but I think it would be more income-based, and that in itself, like I said earlier,
There's a little bit of cost
would,
reductionism, but also like
disproportionately benefit
it's more
black
palatable
people,
in that
because
way.
if you recognize that they are disproportionately affected.
Maybe not necessary. I think that's where I land. Like maybe reparations aren't necessary, depending on what you mean by that. In the sense that like there are other potential solutions that aren't technically reparations to the problems that exist. You could argue though on a moral basis, like I don't know, you know, wealth was stolen from people for hundreds of years. Paying it back seems kind of like the least you could do kind of thing.
By a systemic injustice, then doing it on like a class level would uplift proportionally more black people than white people or any other race.
Yeah, I think like mostly like black GIs that were left out of like the New Deal, for instance, that to be able to come back and as a white American, as a white veteran, to get.
I love, by the way, that Jacob is talking about the GI Bill because people will often be like, "Oh, slavery was 160 years ago. Why are you trying to pay it back? All those people are dead." But the GI Bill, some people had met their grandparents that were affected by this, and it's a reminder that shit was kind of fucked for black people even after slavery ended. That wasn't just the end of it, and neither was the Civil Rights Act. The GI Bill I know is before the Civil Rights Act, but as an example of this, yeah, black GIs just didn't get it. They just weren't entitled to those benefits, and a lot of people were able to do a lot better for themselves and for their family because of the benefits of the GI Bill, but not the black soldiers who did the exact same fighting.
It's a home loan and then build that generational wealth. You could not get that as a black American. So there needs to be, I think, reparations. I don't care really what form it comes from. I think free healthcare, free college, so that everyone has like an equal opportunity to.
Yeah, see, these are things like that are why I would say like maybe it's not necessary to do reparations, because like things like this are not reparations, but would be helpful, would be really good, and maybe with enough of those things, like it becomes unnecessary if people are actually given a foundation to succeed without specifically reparations happening, then like, okay, fine. Yeah, I don't know.
Educate themselves to build a better life for themselves. So it's sort of like, and I think Germany is also a perfect model to follow. You know, by issuing first of all a formal apology, which we haven't even done that, but also just like
yeah, I mean,
to,
that's kind of weird that we never did.
Funds, and you know, just I think a more equitable society striving for that is reparations in and of itself.
I have no problems with reparations if they had happened initially during the like slavery or the civil
Definitely
rights
agree.
movement or
Also,
any
they
of
did,
that.
but then they got
to try and
redone.
do that now logistically just doesn't really make any sense. And like,
well,
where
yeah,
would
it's
this
be
money
very difficult, but that's also like why it needs to be done sooner rather than later. The longer we wait, the harder it gets. Though the question of like when it becomes too late, I'm not even sure that there is an answer to that. A debt is owed, right?
come from? Like, we're in so much debt as a nation.
Yeah, that's not
Would
really
I
debt.
get this money?
Okay, but like the debt as a nation is completely irrelevant. Some of the things that can be given as reparations have nothing to do with money. So, for example, just giving land is generally a source of intergenerational wealth, just the property in general. So just like, okay, here's 40 acres or whatever, there's a lot of land that is available to be given in that way, and that doesn't cost money, right? There's no debt that happens from that.
I'm biracial or triracial. Like, do mixed people get it? And like, do Irish people get reparations when they were indentured servants?
I think for reparations, if you can find specific instances of somebody being like actually deprived of something, whether specific instances of like the 40 acres and a meal promise, or whether you can find specific entrance.
The GI Bill's a good example of that too.
Railroads or Irish people, whatever, people being deprived of things, that's okay. But otherwise, yeah, it's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe that's the way it needs to happen, but like I don't know. This is why maybe the solution is one of, you know, instead of reparations, shoring up everybody so that nobody has these problems of poverty. You effectively solve the problem. You know, like it's not perfect, but like maybe that's another way around it. I don't know. I know I'm arguing against myself here. I keep going back and forth on this subject.
Yeah, America's
kind of
unique
torn
because we have bent over backwards for decades now, putting minorities in a position of privilege.
We
I
haven't.
feel like we have done so much to give back to the communities that were obviously wronged. And I agree with
Like
both
what?
of you. Like, had this happened a long time ago, I would understand it. If we had specific incidences that we could trace where people were just completely screwed over, I would respect it. But
Yeah, but like this guy would absolutely not be on board for like, okay, let's do reparations for the GI Bill. Or like for the Tulsa massacre, things that happened in the last century. These like people are alive today who knew people who were affected by this, or like immediate like met their family members that were affected by this. I don't know if there are people alive today who were directly affected. Maybe they'd have to be pretty old, but like, okay, that's also a possibility. But this guy wouldn't be on board for it.
right now, I don't deserve a payment for something my great-great-great-great-grandparents went through, and I don't think that white people are responsible for paying that to
No
me either.
one's saying, okay, this is another misdirection that happens of like, oh, it's white people paying. No, it's the U.S. government. It's the U.S. government. It's not white people. It's the U.S. government.
I know we don't want to use the word virtue signaling, but it's sort of like a bribe for a vote in a way, at least in my opinion. In states like California, where they've been throwing around the idea of, oh, we want to pay out this much money to every black citizen in there.
So this is a thing that the right has been doing a lot lately, where they act like doing things that are good for their constituents is a bribe. No, that's what governance is. Like that's what happens in democracy. Like, oh, you'll vote for the person who will make life better for people, and you're like, oh, that's a bribe. You should do things that are worse for me because that's the good option. I don't know what the fuck
In
he's
the
talking
state,
about.
it's like, oh, are you serious? Because this is kind of like a joke, in my opinion.
I think that if we impose reparations now, I think it
Impose
will
is
rip
not the right
America
word, definitely.
apart. I think
What?
that we're already separated enough as it is.
Yeah, but like that argument is like, we can't do it because the racists won't like. Well, fuck the racists. I don't know.
And now you're going to have people walking around going, "You owe me money. You owe me money."
That's
I'm
not
paying you money.
how
It would
that
just
works.
Really rip us apart.
Giving somebody money doesn't mean.
Notice how they keep talking about the characterized version of like, oh, reparations means that like black people can go up to white people and be like, hey, give me $20, and that's how that works. It's not. That's not anything.
Mean anything if they don't know what to do with the money or how to handle the money. So if the
It's not
primary
necessarily cash.
issue in black
And
culture,
that's pretty like notice though like oh it's kind of it makes me feel bad like I don't deserve what I have when there's affirmative action, but black people can't be trusted with like yeah, I don't know, it's a pretty poor view of black people.
or with black people is generational trauma, then maybe they need more therapy than they need money, honestly.
Which conservatives are also against.
Well, that's kind of my argument. Like, if there is like that, like generational trauma or whatever, like I think examples of like free healthcare, they could see a therapist and not be, fall into debt. And I think the
That'd be
argument of like
cool.
the logistical nightmares of it, I think if we want to pay for something in this country, we usually find a way to do it, especially when it comes to the military. So, I mean, we pay for multi-billion-dollar
It's
jets
not
all
the
the
dollars,
time.
it's who's supposed to get them.
Not to
Yeah, okay, now he doesn't care about the money. Like, now it's not about the money. Now it's like, nah, black people aren't supposed to get money, like
attack progressives, but that is like the most progressive idea in the world. Is like I can see the headlines like reparations voted on in Congress to be paid in the form of free therapy for people in the hood. That just sounds like the funniest.
Yeah, I mean that's really stupid, but like it is stupid when you put it in that way. But remember, he was trying to. I don't like what I think Destiny kind of missed what Jacob was trying to do. What he was trying to do was like, okay, you want to talk about like, oh, she was joking about like they need therapy. Like, oh, then like maybe my suggestion of what I wouldn't call this reparations, but Jacob had been of like free healthcare, whatever, which is already good and like a thing that should probably happen. Of like, oh, okay, well then like they can get the therapy or whatever, but it's at least turning this idea of like, well, they don't need money, they need this thing. Okay, let's get that thing as let's make that possible. But they're against that too, and I don't like
thing in the world. But
Well, I also don't think it's gonna come directly from like white person to black person. Like, oh,
That's important.
Your lineage affected his lineage.
It is though. Like in San Francisco, they were going to raise the average family or the average household in San Francisco was expected to pay $600,000 each with the $5 million per black person proposal that they had. And I used to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was repulsed by that because you.
So notice what he said at the outset does not line up with what he laid out. He was like, no, it is coming from white people because because households were gonna pay in taxes. Not white households, just households. Like
so
what?
many homeless veterans on the streets, and they were going to give.
I mean, you're complaining about the homeless veterans, but you argue against anything that would help them. So I don't know.
Black people a home for as little as $1 just for being black. Mind you, slavery wasn't even in California. So why that was going to be the case, like I don't
You're
understand.
right,
but
and
it's
those black
extremely-
people definitely didn't come from anywhere else. They spawned directly in San Francisco, and or moved from Africa to San Francisco, and not from other places in this country that might have had slavery. Yeah, definitely the only place they could have come from is a place that didn't have slavery. That's not possible.
Unrealistic to think that the average family in San Francisco can afford that.
That's because Newsom wants to get reelected.
Also,
Okay, but
also, there's no way those numbers are accurate.
You really care
Precisely.
about homeless veterans, right?
That's just
you
a
do.
lack
This
of
is a
sight.
misdirection, but
You
he's
don't
correct.
know
I feel like
me.
you're all
Yeah,
your
I
arguments
fucking
are
do,
ad hominem.
man.
But you're here
Literally
as a
every
conservative.
single one
But
ad
you're here as a
hominem.
conservative.
That's also not true.
So what policies do you support for homeless veterans?
There's ways to address. I mean,
Specifically.
for homeless in general.
That's a whole different conversation.
Oh, now you care about the topic of conversation?
Middle ground in there.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's a great ending note. White liberals have a savior. complex.
Yeah, some of them do. Yeah, yeah, like for real. Not all of them, but like that's a real thing.
Well, I gotta say.
Oh,
this
one
is a
person's
shock.
off it.
I never expected all four of you to just come forward.
Oh,
and
that's
admit
'cause
it, but you know
you-
what? I'm happy with these results.
Yeah, okay. The ingenuity. What he means is like, oh, you guys would never admit to this thing that's obvious. Like he's basically denigrating them for a belief they don't hold, but also but it's like, oh, but you're admitting it. Like, oh, you're admitting you have a white savior complex. They're not. That's not what they're saying.
I just
I
think
hate this guy.
it's
Goddamn.
a lot of people, I guess people, of the left, whatever, can kind of fall into that trap of thinking that black people as a monolith need to be saved as a whole.
I have no shame about it. I have a savior complex as an older brother, and I will save you whether you like it or not. So,
okay, that's a funny joke, but they're gonna take it
Because a lot of us
seriously.
are really just exhausted of being viewed as our skin color. Because when you have this mindset that you need to save black people, and we're just sitting here minding our own business. And
I really wish one of the liberals would be
I don't
like,
know
by
why
the
there's
way,
that
I don't
need
mean
for
me
this immense
specifically.
pressure to be so apologetic and just always trying to cater and
Or
coddle
like,
to black people.
I
when we
wouldn't say
just wanna be
all of
treated like
them
everybody
act in
else.
this
We're
way.
equal
Like,
for a reason.
I think especially recently with a lot of riot stuff that's gone on or protest stuff that's gone on, people on the left tend to infantilize a lot of different types of protesters, and
Yep.
especially even talking to, some of the other black content creators I do content with, when you hear a lot of progressives come out and say, well, they don't have a choice but to riot or break into this store, or, well, they're stealing, these electronics or shoes for good reasons, you just don't realize it. I think a lot of people kind of look both ways, and it's a little bit weird that there's such a complex on the left to excuse like every single possible negative behavior from somebody, as long as they're a skin color that you're kind of in charge of protecting.
Okay, so this is where I'm gonna have to disagree with Destiny here, not in specifics, but in concept. What he's talking about, you have to remember his positions on, well, maybe I shouldn't say remember if you're not familiar, but his positions on the Black Lives Matter protests were pretty repugnant. That's why he got kicked from Twitch, was like how bad his statements and beliefs on it were. And this is a mischaracterization of what a lot of people were saying. It's not that the rioting was justified so much as it is indicative of other problems. People don't steal shoes because they just are evil and want to like do crimes or whatever. They often do it because there's some underlying issue, like maybe they're really poor and they can't afford it or whatever. And like that doesn't justify that doesn't mean that they're doing it only because these are things they need. Often it's like, oh, I just want more wealth, and that's one of the reasons. I'm not trying to exonerate anyone who was engaging in that kind of behavior, but remember, Destiny's also a capitalist. Stealing to him, he's been on record of saying like stealing should be, you can defend against, you should be allowed to protect yourself from theft with lethal force, with deadly force. You should be able to do that, and that's ridiculous. That's absurd. Stuff is less important than people, and there's things you can learn about rioting. There's like people say rioting is the language of the oppressed. Crime isn't necessarily acceptable, but you can learn things from what crimes happen and why and where, things like that. And so this is like he's kind of opposing that concept while in talking in specifics of like, well, it's, people were saying it's always okay for, like, that's not what people were saying. But this is the guy who was saying like the riot, like he's on record as saying the rioting needs to stop, and he was saying like militias need to gun down dipshit protesters, and like that's okay or whatever. Like they have his blessing. Like, this is where he's coming from, and it's absolutely disgusting.
I find that very offensive.
Yeah.
I find it
It's really
extremely. It upsets me to hear that, because we're just like you. We just have a different skin color, and to hear that you have to help me is offensive to me. I can do it on my own.
Well, we have to break it down
that's
sometime.
the thing. Like, you can do it on your own in the sense that you're capable as an individual. What you can't do on your own is the same kind of thing I can't do on my own, and that's the trap people fall into, is not agreeing, or not noticing that yes, lots of people have this issue of you cannot overcome a systemic problem individually in the same way that I can't. Right? That's why these are systemic problems. These are why things need to be dealt with on a broad basis and not on an individual level. Maybe one person who is minoritized can like break out and do well, but most won't beat the odds. That's what odds are, right? That's paraphrasing for Innuendo Studio again, but like a huge number of people are disadvantaged and cannot accomplish not because of their inability, but because of the deck being stacked against them. And and to say we should unstack the deck isn't to say that you're incapable. Though I think a lot of people do fall into that trap. This is why the goal is often for progressives an equal playing field, equal opportunity, because people like, well, I don't want to like self-aggrandize, but like I trust that people are capable, and if they have the ability to succeed, they will.
Why these riots happen. You know, MLK once said that riots are the voice of the unheard. So if you are to address the problem and stop the riots, you have to address the underlying inequality that has historically been pervasive. You know, even if you as individual people are doing fine and you don't want anybody else to get in the way of that, that's cool, and I'm not going to be the one to get in the way. But the disparities are undeniable.
So if you take pride in having,
I think
a
Alec
white savior
did a really good
complex,
job with that.
What is it
Yeah.
that you think that you're doing to save black people, and what is it? That
Oh
you think that you're
God,
saving black
please, like, can someone please push back on like, oh, you have a white savior complex? Like, God.
from?
I am trying to make the world a better place through whatever means I can, and
But you're doing it on the backs of us.
What do you mean on the backs of
I
it?
would say
What?
so.
Yeah, I actually do.
We
I
know
feel
you do.
like,
You just
like
did.
You want to be a savior for, and you're using me to make yourself feel good.
No.
That's what
How
I'm
am I
hearing.
hurting you?
You're not letting me have my own voice. You're not
You're
letting me
speaking
speak.
right now. What
You're
the
speaking
fuck are
now?
you talking
cut
about?
her off.
Yeah.
You're
Well,
arguing.
I feel like
Oh,
I
you
have
fucking
to.
Yeah.
retarded. Like,
Well, what's happening?
Jesus.
I mean, you're speaking right now. You're speaking right now in this particular setting. But what you're saying is, like, you took it back to riots and so forth, and it makes it seem like the only way that we as black people can have a voice is by riots.
No,
and then you
but
need
he's
to come
saying that
along and
is
you
a
need to
way
say,
that you
"Okay,
that people
pull
can
your
have a
black
voice.
child,
What?
Let me help you. That's
What?
offensive to me.
What?
And,
He didn't
and
say those
I feel
things.
Like you're
Like-
making yourself feel good about trying to help us, and it.
I also think that, like,
He just
when we
didn't
talk
say
about
those things you
damage,
accused him
I
of.
think especially when it comes to a lot of the shoplifting stuff that's going on in certain cities. You
All
get
right,
a lot of white
Destiny.
people that live in nice suburbs saying things like shoplifting is no big deal, that's fine, and then you'll catch YouTube videos of them later on being in a Walgreens in like a shoddy neighborhood, and they're like, man, why is the deodorant behind a locked case? It's very easy to sit behind a gated community and say, oh, well, you know, it's not a big deal, you know. They steal because they have to. Riots are the language of the unheard. I think
By the
people
way,
haven't read
those
the
are
full context of that
accurate.
quote. When MLK was saying riots were the language of the unheard and you need to address the underlying condition, he wasn't condoning the rioting. He was
No,
just understanding.
neither is
Obviously,
Alec.
there are a lot-
Neither is Alec. What the fuck are you talking about? Destiny, Alec didn't condone it. He was just being understanding and saying that we need to alleviate the underlying conditions. He didn't say it was cool or whatever. Jesus Christ, man.
A bunch of white people that feel they need to be a savior, but I think there's a difference between helping.
Oh, and by the way, like when someone like shoplifts baby formula or whatever, which, as I understand, is one of the most common things to be shoplifted, they're not doing it to get rich. They're doing it because they need to feed their kid. Like, this is the basic, like, the like first question everyone asks you in an ethics class because they think it's so deep of like, oh, would you steal to feed your family? And it's like ridiculous to say no, you wouldn't, because obviously there are things that are important enough to break the law for, and feeding yourself seems like one of those things. Feeding your kids seems like one of those things that people tend to agree, yeah, you will do a moral wrong in order to accomplish that. But like, we're acting as though shoplifting is always just like, well, I just want more money, so I'm just gonna take more stuff because, like, fuck you.
Saving. Like, I don't think I would need to save black people, but I would tremendously love to help and make sure everyone has like equal outcome, or not equal outcome, but at least equal opportunity, which, in my opinion, I feel we do not have in this.
By the way, I agree with that, and I'm of the belief that if there were equal opportunity, you would see equal outcome, because people are capable, because nobody is inherently better than anyone else. You wouldn't have situations, you know, if all else was equal, you wouldn't have situations where the majority of CEOs are white people. You would probably see a pretty even mix, because people are approximately equal to one another and equally capable. Not in each individual at each thing, but there's no reason why a specific group specific racial group no less, would be more capable at specific things, like being a CEO or whatever.
This country.
This is awkward.
Yeah, hi, the one person. Yeah.
So I didn't step forward just because I don't want to broad brush all white liberals. As
Thank you.
having
I'm
a
glad
white
one
savior
person.
complex. I have experienced white liberals who do have that,
Yup.
and they're very unpleasant people. But I don't think
Well,
every
yeah,
single
I
white
am very
person
much
who's
in
a
agreement
liberal
with
or who is an activist for BLM or any of those things necessarily has a white savior complex. I think that there's a lot of white people who genuinely think that black people are oppressed and they want to help, and that's what they're told.
What it seems like to me when most people have savior complex, regardless of whom they're trying to save, it's like they're taking real pain and real trauma and using that as a way to push this political agenda, but also to alleviate themselves of whatever guilt that they feel unnecessarily. Like, I don't know why a white person today would feel guilty for things that happened decades
as
ago.
it turns out, the people who quote unquote feel guilty aren't the like progressive types. They actually tend to be the conservatives. The reason why people will be like, well, they're teaching about slavery and that makes you feel like your country is bad, it's because they feel guilty. That's the only reason. That only makes sense if you feel guilty about those things. Progressives tend not to. Progressives tend to realize, yeah, I didn't do those things, but those things happened and were bad, and we need to reckon with that fact, understanding that I didn't do it. It wasn't me. And even even if it were my family, that wouldn't be transferable to me. The sins of your father are not transferable to the son or whatever. But progressives aren't the ones who say that you should feel guilty. There are some like wacky, like usually college student type, like, okay, whatever. There's some that will do that, and that's stupid. But the people who actually feel the guilt tend to be conservatives. They just don't call it that.
Let alone something that happened centuries ago.
I've never seen a white person say, I personally feel guilty for slavery. Maybe
promise
they're
you.
out there.
I have, and that's not don't fall on that. Don't die on that hill.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, in second
I
grade,
definitely
when I taught us
have.
about slavery, almost every kid in my classroom would spend their entire time looking at black kids in that classroom. How was I supposed to not think, wow, these people are feeling guilty for something that
In
they have
second
no involvement
grade,
in and I have no
Every
involvement
kid in my classroom understands.
I was in a room full of 6-year-olds who heard about slavery and felt guilty. That means therefore they're 6. They're literally 6, my guy.
The context.
People hate feeling uncomfortable, and obviously you don't want to feel like the bad guy, and so I feel like it comes from a place of like, oh, well, like, let me make sure that I'm different, and like, I'm showing you that I want to like help you, but it comes across like, I think it can land very poorly.
I'll tell you what, stop it.
Stop
Because
it.
what happens is
Stop
when
what?
you put yourself as the white savior, what you do is you elevate yourself above the black person because you feel then like you have to save us. So just stop it. Just
Stop
treat
what?
everybody
Well,
regular
yeah,
and normal.
okay.
Just like I would treat
I
you
agree
regular
that
and
people
normal,
should
you
stop
treat us regular and
like
normal
having
rather
the
than
savior
trying to
complex,
save
but you shouldn't stop trying to rectify injustice. And a lot of injustice in this country and in the world is on racial lines. So ultimately racial justice becomes necessary. And like that, you don't need to have a savior complex for that, but it sounds like she's implying like stop doing the racial justice thing. But the problem isn't the racial justice, it's the savior complex.
Yes.
I just got one thing I wanted to bring up earlier about taxes, because you were saying that you had your job and you were talking about how like you get the tax
I guess it's
every
just
time
like
and you're like seeing the
free form
tax go up.
conversation portion.
I worked in nursing homes in 2020 COVID. The last thing that was on my mind when I watched 60 and 70-year-olds on their deathbeds suffocating to death was taxes.
I
was
don't
worried
think the anger
about
comes across
healthcare.
well here, but
I didn't give a shit about taxes in that time. So when I go to work every day, that's what I see. That's what I want to fix.
I see you once again elevating
What do you mean
yourself
elevating
above
yourself?
the rest of us.
What?
Particularly at me, a white man elevating himself
oh
above
my
a black person.
god.
That's what
Here's the liberal id poll. Like they accuse the people on the left of like elevating the black voice, but then this guy is like, okay, you're talking about taxes. I don't give a shit about taxes when people are dying, and you're like, you're the white person elevating yourself above the black. He didn't. What the fuck are you talking about? He did not call you a bootlicker. He didn't. He didn't call you a bootlicker.
Oh no, I triggered them all.
You called you a bootlicker. You said that you don't like when people call you that. He didn't do that. Maybe it happened in some of the parts I got cut out or whatever, but like, no, he didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
I'm
sorry.
not triggered. I'm chilling, but
No,
So
you're
what I
triggered
hope
as
comes
fuck.
out of
I don't
this
know.
conversation is that we're all Americans, and because we're all Americans,
Nice
actually,
dodge.
we
Nice-
know that America
nice
has a bunch of
refusal to talk
problems,
about
and
what
I
he was
think
talking
every
about.
person here wants to solve the problems, and I think everybody
That's
is
pretty
bringing what they have
frustrating.
to the table with their ideas on how to get us to unify. This kind of stuff, right?
This kind of
But
stuff.
you
Don't
got
talk
something
about
in
people
there.
dying when I
I'm
mentioned
gonna
my
give you the benefit-
after I mentioned my taxes. Well, after the thing, like yeah. I don't know.
benefit of the doubt that you have something in there that's redeeming about you that would bring all of Americans together. So I hope that we end on the note of American.
Why are you?
UNITY.
I,
Oh
I
my
would like to
God.
say we're all made in the image of God, and so we're all have our inerrant worth just because we're made in His image, and we should treat each other as fellow image bearers, not just by the color of.
I mean, he
our
didn't.
skin.
He didn't do
I mean,
that.
as
He was
Martin
talking
Luther
about the thing that
King
she was
said.
talking about. Oh yeah, it's the one thing Martin Luther King said. He sprung up into existence, and he said, "Don't judge people by the content of the character. Judge them by the color of their skin. Don't judge them by the color of their skin." And then he vanished, and he said no other things as far as conservatives are
He
concerned.
also did not like capitalism.
By the way, yeah,
I think
like, but
something
you don't
that's
give a shit
really
about that. Yeah.
challenging, I'm definitely
Notice that we're just not talking about like, hey, who gives a shit about taxes when people are dying? But no, okay, sure. Like, we're just gonna pretend like that was racist somehow.
guilty in the past of throwing around the Uncle Tom word. I used to be hardcore progressive. I'm still relatively progressive. But something that I've learned as time has gone on is being a white person isolates you from a lot of the different types of racial struggles that people go through. And those struggles can take a lot of different forms. Not just, was my ancestor a slave, and not just is my culture bad, but sometimes in the way that, people grow and develop, right? Like, am I actually choosing these political beliefs because they mean something to me, or is it because I'm black or my parents are black? If I speak a certain way, am I betraying my race?
Is
If
he
I am a
getting at
political
like the
orientation,
thing
am
that
I a
the
bootlicker?
conservatives were
And I
starting
think that
with?
it's important when you're coming from a progressive point of view to understand that even though there are conservatives that are black people, you have to treat them as individuals, and
sure.
not just come at it with this like you're black.
Most
you're a
people
conservative,
had
therefore
been
here's,
doing
like
this.
6 or 7 different slurs that I can use against you, but they're approved because I happen to be on the progressive side.
Well, I mean, people have been pretty off of. Oh, okay, whatever. It was a terrible note to end on, but yeah, that was really interesting. I'm glad we went over it. I hope you all got stuff out of that too. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Do you see what I mean about optics, though? The big thing was like, how do you come across? Even at the end there, that was the bold thing of like, oh, let's paint like this the liberal getting mad about people dying of COVID as him being racist because he's talking to a black woman. Like, I don't even know what he did that was allegedly elevating him over her that she's claiming he was like being racist about or whatever. But yeah, it was really interesting. It was cool to go over. I finished my coffee very quickly. It was quite good. We'll be back tomorrow. Probably do like a debate review or something else. And let me know what y'all think about the These Are the Questions segment we did last week. I kind of want to do that recurring. We'll see if Hexic can come back. We can do this with other people as well. Maybe we can do a recurring segment. So we'll see. But that said, don't forget, hit that follow button. We got some more people joining. And if we get partnered on Kick, I will just absolutely suffer through an awful cup of tea for your pleasure. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day and be well. Bye.